gosh. One has a little heart on his head.
Let's see what's up.
There they are. It's the Ummagumma cows. Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records. This is Pink Floyd's experimental period. Glad I didn't step in cow shit there, but I did break my shoe. Welcome everyone to the Vinyl Monday Season 4 finale. I'm Abby, and Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If I shudder to think of how long this video will be, specials aren't your thing, don't worry, I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. There will be one short for each album we cover today, going up across the next couple weeks. This special was inspired by Anton Corbijn's Squaring the Circle documentary and Professor of Rock's Echoes video going up the day after I saw Squaring the Circle for the first time. This is also kind of my answer to Zoink's Pink Floyd The Big Four video. I say kind of because I haven't actually watched that video. I've had the concept of a multi-album video rattling around in my head for about 3 years now, though it was not my intent for this to be the multi-album video debut on my channel. MC5 A Brief History happened first, it was very successful, but ABH was a fluke. My rationale is, if I can pull off this project on Pink Floyd's most overlooked yet important period, with reviews of the 4 unloved middle child albums of their discography, Ummagumma, Atom Heart Mother, Meddle, and Obscured by Clouds, then I can move forward with larger episodes like this with groups I intended to cover 3 years ago. Let's talk sources, baby, because this video is going to be jam-packed with information, and I got it from somewhere. Most anything from The Melody Maker, NME, Disc and Music Echo, or Sounds came from the World Radio History Archive. The only Pink Floyd member to have written a memoir at the time of me posting this is Nick Mason. He's kind of the premier Pink Floyd oral historian. I quoted Inside Out quite a bit because Nick makes equally brilliant and fucking funny insights. Also, can we talk about how shady it is that the cover design uses the piggy and the skyline of the Battersea Power Station from Animals and the Wall-era Pink Floyd logo? Roger Waters is haunting the narrative. I did use Mark Blake's Comfortably Numb for this project, but I have a lot of issues with this text. Blake is impressively bad with dates, times, and places, so I cross-referenced the hell out of him with Nick Hodges and Jan Priston's Embryo and Glenn Povey's Echoes. Embryo came in clutch for the Melody Maker, NME, and Disc and Music Echo features that haven't been digitized on the World Radio History Archive yet, and of course, Glenn Povey was the man behind the amazing Pudding fanzine in the 80s. Nicholas Schaffner's Saucerful of Secrets is well over 30 years old now, but still holds up. He helped clarify some things that both Mason and Blake missed. I dipped back into sources from my Syd Barrett project 6 months ago. A couple documentaries pop up, like the aforementioned Squaring the Circle. And even then, there is so little out there on Obscured by Clouds. For literally anything on that album, I had to lean pretty heavy on Echoes and Jean-Michel Gedson and Philippe Margatin's Pink Floyd All the Songs. But Ron Giesen's Flaming Cow, man, this source was a bitch to find. Having an understanding of Atom Heart Mother filtered through its composer was so worth it. Of course, this is not everything I've used. If I were to list off every single source, we'd be here for another like 5 minutes. I've been working on this project for a really long time. It had me like going to record stores and rooting through used magazine bins for one interview with Storm Thorgerson, which remarkably I found. But for further reading and all that good stuff, my full works cited list list is reproduced in the text versions of the album reviews on my website. The Ummagumma review is up now, as is my 50th anniversary retrospective of Wish You Were Here. Atom Heart Mother, Meddle, and Obscured by Clouds will be going up over the next couple weeks. If you subscribe to the mailing list on my website, you will get those as soon as they come out. It's completely free. It's just a little ding to your email when I post. Oh, and subscribe to the channel to know when I come back. Okay, now that we have all of that out of the way, I present to you the Vinyl Monday Season 4 finale, dedicated to the unloved middle children of Pink Floyd's discography, or, if you will, the Meddle children. Quote, "After Sid went crazy in '68 and Dave joined, we were, all of us, searching, fumbling around, looking for, where do we go now? Because here was the guy who starts producing all these songs and was the sort of heartbeat of the band." Quote, "It wasn't what you'd choose, is it? I mean, you wouldn't sit around and say, okay, let's get rid of our songwriter." The five-piece Floyd only lasted a handful of gigs, this promo shoot, and partway through the production of A Saucerful of Secrets. Everything Sid had going on effectively benched him from the project. He only plays guitar on Remember a Day and set the controls for The Heart of the Sun, and he wrote and sang Jug Band Blues. Sid wrote all the lyrics on Piper at the Gates of Dawn, save for Take Up Thy Stethoscope and Walk. That was Roger. Now, Roger tries his handwriting on Saucerful. Who up Corporaling they Clegg right now? As much a masterpiece as Corporal Clegg is, pay attention to the title track of this album and set the controls for The Heart of the Sun. The latter is a measly 5 minutes and change on the LP, but over the next 5 years, Floyd will take these two numbers and go glacial. By the time Saucerful of Secrets came out in late June of 1968, Syd Barrett had been officially out of the band for about 2 months. He took band managers Andrew King and Peter Jenner with him. The new Floyd officially debuted at a free show at Hyde Park. It was the first of its kind. It set the trend for groups like The Stones, King Crimson, and Blind Faith. Check Clapton off your fucking bingo cards. Saucerful of Secrets went over well in the UK, but the US just did not get it. Jim Miller for Rolling Stone identified Sid's fading into the background, saying Jug Band, quote, hardly does credit to his credentials as a composer. He concludes, as the chaos settles reassuringly into a banal, organ cum religious chorus final, one realizes that the Pink Floyd are firmly anchored in the diatonic world, without any deviations from that norm, a matter of effect rather than musical conviction. Unfortunately, a music of effects is a weak base for a rock group to rest its reputation on. But this is what the Pink Floyd have done. Floyd are officially written off as space rock, a label that will follow them for quite literally the rest of modern music history. But more dire was the put-down in Rolling Stone. The Bible foresees it. Pink Floyd are slaves to their equipment. Now that we have all the context in order, let's set the scene. It's late 1968, and Floyd's second ever tour of the States is proving just as much a shit show as the first. Even without an active mental health crisis unfolding, you'll see across the next few hours that Pink Floyd just have terrible luck with tours. It started with a delay in the guys getting their work visas, subsequently delaying the whole tour. The guys were also too broke to transport their equipment overseas, meaning they had to rent drums, amps, and a PA for every show. They even resorted to borrowing equipment from Electric Lady Studios while they were in New York. They had to detour to Canada to get their right paperwork in the middle of their residency at said club in New York. Once they finally got the wheels turning, an air traffic control workers' strike effectively grounded the whole thing. Floyd have always been about the experience, whether it's liquid light shows, lighting things on fire, or a giant balloon that may or may not explode over the stadium parking lot. The problem is, the experience runs up a pretty sizable bill, even with their budget cuts. Halfway through this tour, their money ran out. They were stranded until they could foot the bill, and the light show is put on ice for the foreseeable future. And just before they left for the States, booking manager Brian Morrison approached the guys asking them to quickly sign another contract. Roger felt something was off, and he was right. 2 days later, Brian sold his agency to NEMS Enterprises, once ran by Brian Epstein, rest in peace, now ran by Vic Lewis. We'll come back to Vic later. Aside from this comedy of errors, this tour with the Soft Machine is significant for 2 reasons. Number 1, Roger tries LSD for the second and final time. He has such a bad time, he swears it off forever. Taking LSD out of the equation in 1968 was a big move. Everyone was taking acid. Everyone! However, Roger didn't swear off substances completely. This is Pink Floyd we're talking about here. They are seldom seen in photo ops without either a beer or a smoke. Author Nicholas Schaffner said, quote, "In the year or 2 after Barrett's departure, the dopers versus drinkers divide that had once polarized the Floyd camp was effectively resolved. Everyone was now doing both." In an attempt to quit smoking, Roger starts rolling his cigarettes with hash. Roger Waters was high for 5 years straight. It's not lost on me that these 5 years were the time in which, by all accounts, he was the easiest to be around. The second significant thing that happens through this tour, Roger develops his stage act of beating the ever-loving shit out of a gong during a saucerful of secrets. It may or may not have been his outlet for all of the stress that being Roger Waters must surely cause. Point Me at the Sky was released as a single in December. It flopped so hard Floyd wouldn't release another single in the UK for almost 10 years. But I find the whole Floyd not doing singles thing kind of inconsequential. It's like making the Dead record a 2-minute Dark Star for a single. Like, what's that gonna get you? It defeats the band's purpose. Singles were too restrictive a format for what Floyd was going for in these few years anyway, especially live. This was an albums band. While Point Me at the Sky was largely forgotten aside from its appearances on compilations, note its B-side. Careful with that axe, Eugene. Careful with That Axe is also only about 5 minutes long in this iteration. With Saucerful and Set the Controls, this will become a staple and much longer live number. The truly historic flop of Point Me at the Sky didn't deter the guys. They were already talking to the melody maker about their next release, a projected double album, to be released on EMI's new subsidiary, Harvest Records, run by Malcolm Jones and Floyd's then producer Norman Smith. The label becomes synonymous with prog thanks to Floyd. Their first release on Harvest was kinda sort of a saucerful follow-up called But What About More? I know. After the widespread reevaluation of Animals a few years back, Floyd fans are calling More one of the last truly underrated Floyd albums. I agree. There's a lot of great stuff on it. Crying Song, Nile Song, it deserves a seat at the table. Plain and simple. I'm more interested in doing a Pink Floyd in film special reviewing More, Zabriskie Point, La Vallée, and Live at Pompeii because I haven't seen anybody else do that and I thought it'd be really cool. But don't hold your breath. After reviewing Pompeii for Tracking Angle back in, I think, May, 4 Pink Floyd albums in this one video and a Wish You Were Here retrospective on my website, I will be thoroughly Floyded out for the foreseeable future. If I so much as see a horse in passing, I will let out an exasperated sigh. For now, More is here. More exists. It was recorded in a manic 9-day spell to accompany Jean-Luc Godard associate Barbette Schroeder's directorial debut of the same name. Schroeder sought out Floyd for their sound and unique approach. Quote, "I was a big fan of the first 2 Floyd records. I thought they were the most extraordinary things I'd ever heard and just wanted to work with them. This won't be the last time they work together." More was not Pink Floyd's first rodeo. They'd appeared in Let's Make Love in London back in '67, scored for The Committee in '68, and do you remember that BBC spot they did while Sid was still around? According to Dave, scoring kept the band's muscles from atrophy while they figured out what the hell to do next. Doing film music was a path we thought we could follow in the future. It wasn't that we wanted to stop being a rock and roll group, it was more of an exercise. A couple months before Moore's release, Floyd debuted one of their most fabled compositions, The Man and the Journey. The Man was intended to be a day in the life of a typical Brexit geezer, or since this is 1969, just the life of an English bloke. Wake up, go to work, have tea, make love to your lady friend. I'm not kidding, there's a sequence called Doing It. Going to sleep and having a nightmare. The journey is a bit more abstract. Part of the nightmare sequence became more Cymbeline. Another part included heavy breathing, ticking clocks, and alarm bells. Careful with That Axe was worked in as Beset by Creatures of the Deep. This is not the first alternate name Eugene will go by. Daybreak became a song called Grantchester Meadows. This shit makes no sense to a modern listener, or even a sober one in 1969, but it made perfect sense to Roger, who always had a taste for theatrics. We wanted to throw away the old format of the pop show, standing on a square stage at one end of a rectangular room and running through a series of numbers. Floyd had their taste of the hit parade, and they were thoroughly done. The Man and the Journey premiered on April 14th, 1969, billed as The Masked Gadgets of Osmanines. I don't even think that's a real word, so we're off to a great start. More furious madness from Pink Floyd. It was performed and recorded again for the BBC in May before Floyd embarked on their first UK tour since 1967. It was taken for one more spin at the Royal Albert Hall to mark the end of this tour in June, aptly dubbed the Final Lunacy. On this night, Floyd might have been the first band to speedrun getting banned from Royal Albert Hall. It starts out normal enough until Rick and the crew start building a table on stage during work. Might as well put that architecture education to use, boys. The crew sat at said table and drank tea while listening to a transistor radio. Yes, the radio was part of the show. They somehow looped it into the PA and stuck a mic in front of it. The Royal Philharmonic Orchestra chimes in, and Ealing Central Amateur Choir joined the fray. Rick played the hall's pipe organ, but was fighting for his life the entire time, as it takes some time for air to go through the pipes after you press the keys. He was just, consistently late or early, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. An art school friend of the band's, quote, created a monster costume involving a gas mask and some enormous genitalia rigged up with a reservoir to enable him to urinate on the front row of the audience. What in the Lamb era Peter Gabriel is that? He appeared during the Labyrinth and scared the daylights out of a girl tripping on acid. A crew member roamed around stage in a gorilla suit. I can't believe that's the most normal thing that's happened so far. Roger somehow got a hold of the cannons used in Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture and set them off. And the grand finale? A pink smoke bomb, of course. Chris Welch said for Melody Maker, it usually is strange inside of the Albert Hall, but by thunder, the Floyd at work are enough to freak the most sober normal. Despite how batshit crazy The Man and the Journey was, reception was shockingly good. From author Glenn Povey, at last they were being taken seriously as pioneers of a new and exciting movement capable of pushing back the boundaries. The experimentalism wasn't so much a free-form muddle as it had been in the past, but something more readily defined by the press, which labeled it, ghastly as the term now sounds, progressive rock. Can't think of something more prog than on-stage dramatics. All they're missing is a guy in a cape. Ah, there he is. So sets the scene for our first, and most bizarre, album excursion. Oh, come on. Yeah, you're about to get real sick of this black t-shirt. Don't blame me, blame him! He's the one who's worn the same outfit for the past 57 fucking years. Actually have something we could do here. Here, let's add his silly little polka dot scarf. Maybe that will make me feel better about being seen in a plain black t-shirt. Well, there's something. It's a good day in the Vinyl Monday verse when I get to talk about surrealism in album art. We've done it a few times before. Don Van Vliet and his Carped, Badfinger's simultaneous nod to Dolly and to Chirico, the Apple Records logo being a nod to Magritte. The Ummagumma cover is a loose example of the Drost effect, named for this tin of Drost cocoa, an image seemingly infinitely repeating. Of all the techniques surrealists use, this is the one that freaked me out the most as a kid and still does today. For some reason, the inclusion of the Gigi soundtrack on the original cover makes it all the more unsettling. Original copies and all UK copies have Gigi intact. Since mine is a Canadian repress, the Gigi cover was removed for copyright reasons. It's oddly validating that even Hypnosis had to deal with the ire of the copyright gods. Anyway, where a true Drost effect would be the same image infinitely repeating, Hypnosis had the guys swap poses between shots. The one closest to us has Dave in the chair, Raj sitting on the ground, Nick doing his best dad on a Sunday morning contemplating the lawn he is about to mow stance, and Rick let the intrusive thoughts win. He's got his leggies in the air. The one inside it has Raj in the chair, Nick sitting on the ground, Rick stancing, and Dave waving his leggies, etc., etc. On my copy, the innermost image is the Saucerful of Secrets album art, but on newer reissues, which benefit from modern photo editing technology, you get the Ummagumma covers repeating. According to Storm, the image was meant to, quote, illustrate the simple idea that Floyd music was multi-layered. The Ummagumma cover photos were shot at Storm Thorgerson's then-girlfriend Libby January's parents' house. That is quite the mouthful. This house was the site of a fabled tea-set Joker's Wild double bill. This is a cover you have to hold in your hands to believe. You just don't get the full effect seeing it on a little square on your screen. Storm put it best in Interview in 1998. Despite whatever protestations may be made by young designers and computer freaks about CD covers, this, you can tell this was 1998. It's just a seventh of the area of an LP cover. Even that was small if you were an artist. It makes the Ummagumma cover all the more remarkable. The back cover was Nick's idea. Roadie Alan Stiles, remember that name, and tour manager Peter Watts hauled all the guys' equipment out to the tarmac at London's Biggin Hill Airport. Their gear is arranged in the shape of a military aircraft carrier. I would not have wanted to be the guy who pulled the short stick and had to go up in the crane to shoot this. Rick later said in interview, sometimes I look at our huge truck and tons of equipment and think, Christ, all I'm doing is playing an organ. Opening up the gatefold, we have black and white photos of the guys. Rod shares his portrait with the first Mrs. Roger Waters, Judy. On Ummagumma, you have Roger Waters on bass and lead vocals, if you can call them that, on Careful with That Axe. Definitely lead vocals on Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. Vocals and guitar on Grantchester Meadows, and certainly something on Several Species. Oh boy. David Gilmour on guitar, lead vocals on The Narrow Way, all instruments on The Narrow Way actually. Richard Wright on organ, vocals, mellotron, piano, bells, and percussion on Sisyphus, and Nick Mason on drums, percussion, and marimba on The Grand Vizier's Garden Party. Special guests include Nick's wife Lindy Mason playing flute on Grand Vizier, and producer Norman Smith possibly plays timpani and gong on Sisyphus. Floyd were really bad at writing things down in this period. The live album was produced by Pink Floyd, engineered by Brian Humphries. The studio album was produced by Norman Smith, engineered by Peter Mew. Roll transition. Last roll transition of the season! If the Man in the Journey spectacle didn't set the scene for Ummagumma, this anecdote from Peter Mew most certainly will. My recollection is that everybody assembled in the studio on the first day with Norman Smith, who asked, "Have you got any songs?" To which Floyd replied, No, Schaffner has a different interpretation of how the album's dual nature came to be. He claims Rick was dissatisfied with the repertoire at the time and longed to play some more Stockhausen-style stuff. Glenn Povey's text says it was Dave's idea, but includes a quote from him that bolsters the healthy competition angle. It was down to a lot of paranoia amongst each other, and thinking we would have a good time doing things on our own for a change. Just for a laugh. Dave is a little more frank in the Jean-Michel Gedson text, quote, "We decided to make the damn album, and each of us to do a piece of music on our own. It was just desperation, really, trying to think of something to do." Roger said in an interview for Melody Maker, quote, "The 4 songs on the first album are a set of numbers that we'd been playing all around the country for a long time, and we decided to record them before we jacked them in. And they've changed a lot since we first recorded them." That live disc did not come easy, though. Their first attempt to record was at Mother's in Birmingham. Birmingham. A viable astronomy Domini came from this gig, but the equipment malfunctioned and most of the rest of the gig was lost. They tried again in Manchester on May 2nd, but save for Careful with That Axe and Set the Controls, the gig was really bad according to Rick. They had no choice but to use it. They only had the mobile unit for 3 gigs. Yes, 3. Bromley Technical College was recorded as well, but turned out even worse than Manchester did. Neither Birmingham nor Manchester produced a sufficient saucerful of secrets, so according to Rick, the 2 were spliced together. Interstellar was lined up for inclusion, but axed. Roger said, quote, "We don't dig that one very much. There were plans to distribute 2,000 acetates of the recording anyway, but I can't find anything on if this actually happened." Live show staple Embryo was also recorded for the album, but given everything else going on, it just didn't fit the LP format. But the venues represented on this half of the album represented Floyd's main audience at the time, clubs and college kids. On that first day in the studio, it was decided that half the runtime of each side of the second disc would be split amongst the guys. To beat Instrumental in 1970, Rick explained, quote, "The 4 pieces of the LP are very different, though there are pieces in all of them which link them together." He seemingly immediately contradicts himself, though, adding, quote, "There wasn't actually any attempt to connect them all. We didn't write together. We just went into the studios on our own to record." Each side of an album holds 25-ish minutes of music max, so each guy got 12 minutes and change to work with. Most of them used this time for one long composition in several movements. Rick got to work on his first on September 17th, 1968. Sisyphus was complete by March of 1969. Nick also began Nicky's tune in September of 68, retitled The Grand Vizier's Garden Party. That was completed in January, upon which Dave entered the studio to work on Dave's scene, eventually retitled The Narrow Way. Roger, on the other hand, wrote one standard song, Grantchester Meadows. He started recording that on March 24th, 1969. It was completed 4 weeks later. His second piece was actually the first he recorded in September of 1968. That one was a musique concrète experiment of sorts, sure. Though they're hell-bent on ditching the space rock label, in July, Floyd scored not 1, not 2, but 3 separate broadcasts of the moon landing. During all of this, Dave and Roger scrambled to help put Sid's first solo album, The Madcap Laughs, together. On working with Sid at this time, Peter Jenner said, quote, "I've always used the analogy of a trolley bus not making a sound and coming out of a thick fog. People in the street are not able to see the top of it. Then, when it finally got to its stop or destination, you would see it, only to watch it disappear into the fog again. I keep hearing bits of Sid, and then it would disappear, and then a bit more would come out, and then disappear into the fog again. His assumption Sid would have a long and illustrious solo career disappeared into the fog as well. Peter oversaw work on Golden Hair and Clowns and Jugglers, then bailed. Madcap took about a year and a half and a whopping 5 producers to complete. Peter, Malcolm Jones, Sid himself, and Dave and Roger. The latter 2 only took on the project to get it done. EMI threatened to can Madcap due to an extended, frequently interrupted timeline, and Sid's worsening mental health meant for constant retakes, putting the whole thing way over budget. EMI gave Dave and Roger 3 days to complete Madcap. but they had to pause this project to go on tour through Holland in July. Dave and Raj admittedly used some slapdash methods on their tracks, resulting in unorthodox, controversial, and sometimes unflattering results, but overall a quirky and remarkably strong LP. For more on Madcap, head to the mid-season special about Syd Barrett's solo career. Back to Ummagumma. All accounts agree it's a slang term for copulation. Schaffner said the boys picked it up in their Cambridge days. According to Dave, quote, "It's just a name. It wasn't taken because it means anything. It was taken because it sounded interesting and nice. Modern accounts say it's an emoism."
You like D&D, Audrey Hepburn, Fangoria, Harry Houdini, and croquet.
No, not that emo. Friend of the band, emo, aka Ian Moore. It was a word I made up about shagging, as in, I'm off foam for some Ummagumma. Floyd, oh my god. Floyd thought I'd heard it somewhere, but it was off the top of my head. The track listing of Ummagumma goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Astronomy Domini, and closing side 1, we have Careful with That Axe, Eugene. Opening up side 2, we have Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, and closing out disc 1, we have A Saucer Full of Secrets. Opening up disc 2, we have Sisyphus, parts 1 through 4, then Grantchester Meadows, and closing side 3 is several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pict. Yeah, we're calling that several species from here on out. Opening up side 4, we have The Narrow Way, parts 1 through 3, and the album closes with The Grand Vizier's Garden Party, parts 1 through 3, with subtitles Entrance, Entertainment, and Exit. Ummagumma was released in October of 1969 to some very divided reviews. The NME gave it 4 stars out of 5, Record Mirror praised it as well, naming it, quote, a truly great progressive album. They mix psychedelic and classical patterns and explore sounds, music, and gimmicks to their fullest extent. From the Melody Maker. The Floyd are currently running against the tide in that they are more interested in creativity than virtuosity. Starting off with a backhanded compliment, alright. Quote, this double album, packed with brilliance and originality, shows just how successful they are. Okay, we've redeemed ourselves. It calls the concept of Ummagumma, half live and half studio, quote, brilliant, as it shows who the band have been in the public eye and who they are as individual musicians. Quote, the whole set can be recommended as an example of exploratory thinking at its best. Rick's Sisyphus is named as highlight of the studio disc, and Roger's Grantchester is called, quote, a thing of permanent beauty. American audiences, though, were not impressed. It seems Rolling Stone skipped out on reviewing it altogether. Nevertheless, it performed well in Europe, but couldn't outperform more from a mere 4 months before. The most notable live gig from this period was the Actuel Pop and Jazz Fest, in which the band jammed with Frank Zappa. In retrospect, Roger wasn't, quote, fantastically amazed with the live album of Ummagumma, but I think the idea for the studio side, doing 1 track each, was basically good. I personally think it would have been better if we'd done them individually and then got the opinions of others, put 4 heads into each piece instead of just 1. I think each piece would have benefited from that, but by the time they were done, we'd used up our studio time. I was quite pleased by the way it came out, though. It sold a lot, which is something. Rick didn't have a very high opinion of the album, calling his contributions, quote, pretentious. Dave said he straight up bullshitted his way through. As for Nick, my own view is that A Saucer Full of Secrets had pointed the way ahead, but we studiously ignored the signposts and headed off making Ummagumma, which proved that we did rather better when everyone worked together rather than as individuals. In mid-November of 1969, Floyd would go off on yet another side quest, an attempt to score Michelangelo Antonioni's Magnum Opus, yes, I used the church pronunciation of Magnum Opus, cue the Common Brigade, Zabriskie Point. keyword attempted to score. When asked what working with Antonioni was like, Roger described it as, quote, sheer hell. Antonioni would be in the studio insisting on a complete take the whole way through, which is just not how Floyd worked. No rough cut, no backing tracks to complete everything later. Everything has to be done to completion right now, and then I'm gonna fall asleep at the console. Roger would present the final take in the morning, and Antonioni would invariably reject it. Bad or good, he, quote, frequently complained the music was too strong and overpowered the visual image. My brother in Christ, why did you ask Pink Floyd to score your movie then? According to Melody Maker in 1969, Floyd were set to record 8 new tracks for Zabriskie, but Antonioni only accepted 3. Careful with That Axe Eugene, retitled Come In Number 51, Your Time Is Up, Crumbling Land, and Heartbeat Pygmy. The rest of the soundtrack was filled out by Jerry Garcia, with cuts by the Youngbloods, Kaleidoscope, etc. Among the tracks Antonioni rejected was Rick's violence sequence. But as we've already seen, Floyd never truly scrapped anything. So, what do I think of Ummagumma? Going in, I remember liking the live album, but I don't remember even touching the studio LP before this. If I did so, it would have been out of morbid curiosity over the several species of it all. Among my Floyd fan friends, opinions on Ummagumma are very divided. My best friend and occasional assistant researcher Jack, shout out to Jack, he helped collect some of the Melody Maker and NME stuff for this episode, he thinks Ummagumma is straight up bad. But one of my Sid Floyd friends, Ethan, thinks it's, quote, a fucking weird-ass record and it's so cool, and even if you're a lame-ass normie, you still get a good live record. A brief note before I review the album, now that the recent Pompeii re-release has shown us it's possible, we need an overhauled Ummagumma remix with an expanded album including live material previously only on Early Years. To place The Man in the Journey alongside Ummagumma would totally change how Floyd fans perceive this album going forward. The deal with Pink Floyd is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Unfortunately, Ummagumma is the parts. Nick called the live disc antiquated. He's not wrong. A decent chunk of it is Sid-era material. Having this here only makes his absence felt glaringly, especially including Astronomy, a song he sang. I won't talk much about Astronomy here since I already covered it back in the Piper video, but the guys take a worthy stab at it here. It's changed a lot since opening Piper. Author Will Romano says it, quote, at times approaches the raucousness of The Who. I used to think this Astronomy was sloppy, but I've since turned around on it. The guys are having fun with it, swapping sections around and repeating others. This does muck with the natural progression of the tune, that's where my initial dislike came from, but with this band in this stage, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's quite exciting to not know what comes next. This album captures an Astronomy even heavier than its original iteration. There's a chord inversion about 2 minutes and 17 seconds in that just sounds like doom. This is loud and completely unlike Dave's playing style. It's fun hearing him indulge in sheer volume. Of course, we hear some slide playing from him. One gorgeous slide sounds like pulling the bow across a cello. The star of the show, though, is Nick. I don't know what it is, but as we will see through the rest of this episode, rarely could Studio Floyd capture the energy Nick was capable of. Being such an intuitive, disciplined player as him has its drawbacks. There's little opportunity for him to be flashy on an LP. He tends to slip into the background, especially through Floyd's classic period. Not here, though. He is responding to the energy, even fueling it with how he unleashes at the 3-minute passage. He plays it straight when one might solo, and he solos when one might play straight. This is where Romano got that Who vibe from, I feel. Keith Moon was known for his playing style that made no sense. His own bandmates' words, not mine. And I'm interested in the equipment Rick is using. The beginning sounds like a synthesizer, a nod to the Morse code on the album. But I don't see any synthesizer on our flat lay on the back cover or any listed in the album credits. This used to be my favorite recording of Eugene. It's better than the B-side version, at least. About Eugene, Dave said, quote, "We were just creating textures and moods over the top of it, taking it up and down. It was largely about dynamics. That's the hallmark of a truly great Eugene. Imagery through dynamics. How can we introduce something in the most goosebump-inducing way possible? An ominous two-note bass line, washes of keyboard like fog hanging low, creeping organ, Dave's falsetto keening in the wind, his wordless moans in pained ecstasy. And, of course, imagine hearing that for the first time, or never having gone to a Floyd show and seeing him do that. How does one figure out they can inhale scream? One of life's great questions, I think. The most terrifying one is Pompeii, careful with that axe. Who could physically sustain doing that? It's the definition of an out-of-body experience, and who was doing that on a song in 1969? You certainly hear people doing the psych freak-out thing, but this is beyond freak-out. This is disembowelment. Though Raj said in interview in 1969 that save for Set the Controls, he didn't tie his writing to any specific image, careful with that axe paints alarmingly vivid images. Though I don't know if you really write lyrics for something like Careful with That Axe. It's an axe murder movie in song. Think of the psychological horror of the scream. Are you the witness to the crime? Are you Eugene's victim letting out the blood-curdling scream? Or are you Eugene himself screaming for your lost sanity? I've always interpreted it the third way. This is my favorite cut on the live album. Given my taste, that shouldn't be of a surprise to you. The next two tracks were quite difficult to evaluate, as I have every intention of covering Saucerful of Secrets in the future. That's why we spent all of 3 minutes on it here today. The Set the Controls here is superior to the album version. What makes a good Set the Controls? Slowing it the hell down. I don't know why the guys rushed it on Saucerful of Secrets, but they gave it some room to breathe here, and I'm so grateful. About the song, Roger said, Set the Controls still has relevance to the sun as the life-giving force, but perhaps it was never a real image, more of a head image. 2 or 3 years ago, I used to read a lot of science fiction books, and that's where it must have come from. Set the Controls is another exercise in dynamics established by the loud hiss of the surface noise. It makes it feel all the more like we're headed towards the core of the sun. It sounds like oppressive heat. The mallet drumming gets more intense. Rick bends the Middle Eastern influence melody into faraway jazz. Dave unleashes a howling wind. The sun is equally life-giving, ripening fruit on the vine, as it is terrifying, mercilessly burning up our spaceship. Roger's all in on his theater kid behavior. He very often would completely ditch the bass for this performance and just like a cigarette smoking in his fingertips, all holding the microphone like this. God. Note an early lyrical reference to madness. Witness the madman who raves at the wall. The key to a good Saucerful of Secrets is speeding the second movement up. It's way too slow on the album. Once the guys make that discovery, they take Saucerful of Secrets out into the depths. Being in the room with the noise takes this song to another level. You have to feel this in your sternum. It's one of those experiences where, yes, the music kind of becomes sludge and there's this like mind-numbing repetition of Nick's drumming, and maybe it loses its momentum at times, but when you hit it just right, When you can stand toe-to-toe with Saucerful of Secrets and allow yourself to be immersed in the experience, it is transcendental. It's fucking crazy. That's exactly what psych rock sought to do. Much physical exertion as Roger's Little Gong act surely took, I want to point out the incredible amount of discipline and physical stamina it takes for a drummer to keep that pattern going for as long as Nick does. One must imagine Sisyphus as a 4-part suite. Who up rolling my boulder right now? Upon the opening of Sisyphus, my knee-jerk reaction was, oh this is a prog band! I don't know, I don't even consider Pink Floyd prog because what they went on to do so far surpassed that title. Only now with this first movement of Sisyphus have I felt Floyd's lineage to prog. Sisyphus Part 1 is grand and muscular, Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill. Part 2 zooms in on Sisyphus the man. Rick's piano begins classical, then romantic, slipping into dissonance and jazz and into his Stockhausen shit. I even hear John Cage prepared piano exercises in there. 3 is the strangest, with exercises in percussion and very speeded screams. It's definitely here, but tame in comparison to what we will hear soon. We cut from screams into organ, and I believe a water effect Rick had on the Mellotron. The organ goes from sweet to foreboding. Our sense of satisfaction ends when we realize the boulder is about to tip over. The suite ends in a slowed down version of the first movement, with the vocal effect on Rick's Mellotron laid in. We feel the devastation. Rick invokes the gravity of Sisyphus' situation. He will be rolling this boulder forever. So long after this piece ends that we cannot fathom it. The human mind cannot comprehend forever. Imagine the psychological distress of eternal damnation. That is what Rick has funneled into this portion of the music. Rick is the George Harrison of Pink Floyd, right? He's the quiet one. Sisyphus introduces us to Rick the musician without needing any words. Grantchester Meadows, to me, feels like an outwardly sad version of the Kinks sitting by the riverside. Roger wrote it from childhood memories, specifically about recalling a childhood memory, as opposed to attempting to place us in the memory. It's gentle, sorrowful, and bears the knowledge we can never go back to this sunny afternoon sitting on the riverbank. Basking in the sunshine of a bygone afternoon, bringing sounds of yesterday into this city room. Already we're hearing maturing in Roger's writing from that choke-on-bread greasy spoon business. Is it a little twee that we hear chirping birds and a buzzing bee? Yeah, there's quite a sweet vocal delivery and a nice harmony as well. I can't believe I have to talk about several species in this video. I'm reviewing several species of small furry animals and echoes in the same video. Man, what the fuck? Several Species is the worst Pink Floyd song. This is not a song. This is not avant-garde. This is not even musique concrète. It's Roger Waters making rhythmic animal noises and saying nonsense in a Scottish accent, and also the obligatory screaming. I would have loved to sit in on a session for this though, just to see what it would have looked like. You know this guy is pulling crazy faces while he does this stuff. From Pink Floyd All the Songs, quote, "In response to a journalist who inquired about the chick screams, an unidentified member of the group replied, 'The chick screaming is a very beautiful chick. She's very tall and thin and dresses in black, and she sits and drinks and smokes cigarettes, and her name is Roger Waters.'" It ends with a reference to Jimi Hendrix's The Wind Cries Mary.
And the wind cried Mary.
I don't know, we're not out of the 60s just yet. Of the 4 instrumental pieces, I found Dave's The Narrow Way the most impressive. Dave's still pretty new to the band. He admitted in retrospect he wasn't a confident songwriter. Where his confidence lied at the time was his playing. Specifically, his ability to create textures. I think that's always been one of his strong suits as a player. High-pitched cries on the slide, full-bodied acoustic strumming, and complex finger-picking. The Narrow Way might be the closest thing we've got to pop on this whole disc. Grantchester is a bit morose for that classifier. The Narrow Way is quite California, with its bright chords in part 1. Of course, there's some indulging in the psychedelic, with stereo panning effects, a very psych part 2, which gives way to unfortunate aimless whizzing. Part 3 is Dave's attempt at lyricism. It absolutely takes a backseat to the music, though. He mixes his folksy interests with a piano-driven passage and transforms it into a dark, memorable, stamping riff. It reminds me of She's So Heavy if it were interpreted by... oh my god, I can't say that band's name in this video given recent Roger-shaped events. The comments will be a goddamn war zone! This might be the strongest music on the disc. About Grand Vizier, Nick said, I attempted to do a variation on the obligatory drum solo. I have never been a fan of gymnastic workouts at the kit by myself or anyone else. The magic of Nick Mason is that he does just what he needs to do for a song. Never more, never less. So it feels weird having him be center stage by default. He doesn't settle into the late 60s, early 70s cliche of the drum solo track like he easily could have. Instead, he takes the opportunity to play with percussion. The element of play is so important to the creative process, being such stoic, serious guys all the time. I feel Floyd forgot this. Grand Vizier is all play, both with the instruments and the capabilities of the studio. Of the studio disc, Grand Vizier is the most imaginative. Although I'm kind of beefing with you right now, Nick, because part 2 made me think there was something wrong with my turntable setup. I was stopping to clean the stylus, adjust the counterweight, mucked with my preamp. I even took apart the whole surround sound system and put it all back together, and I tested speakers individually. Nope, that's just part of the song. You gotta love the psychedelic experience. Lindy's flute playing in parts 1 and 3 are lovely. I believe she plays some more on More. It's fun to imagine an alternate universe where Floyd joined the canon of rock groups with flute a la Jethro Tull. Ummagumma is a great live disc. I was hard on it in the past, but I am sold now. It's a snapshot of a remarkable place in time. Pink Floyd before they were Pink Floyd. They could still afford to play the weird numbers because it was what they were known for. Melody Maker was right about Ummagumma in the sense that the live disc prioritizes creativity over virtuosity. Creativity is very often more interesting to listen to than virtuosity. Ummagumma's studio disc exposes this stage of Floyd's greatest weakness: songwriting. No one has come into his own as a writer yet, not even the guys who are writing lyrics. Ummagumma, deeply flawed record to a modern listener unfamiliar with how the music industry in the 1960s worked. It seems truly incredible EMI would ever indulge a project as aimless, self-indulgent, and strange as Ummagumma. Consider what Mark Blake said, quote, "Their far-out sounds, to quote one review of the time, may have excluded them from the singles charts, but with a new breed of discerning album buyer to pitch to, EMI viewed the group as a potential money spinner. EMI wanted to appeal to the highbrow crowd supposedly consuming prog rock." You have to understand how Floyd's target audience are actually consuming this music at the time, though. They got together with their friends, swapped albums freely, laid on the floor to listen, and got stoned out of their gourds. Yeah, and you have to remember, the guys making this music, this is Pink Floyd in 1969, they are stoned out of their gourds too. If anything, I'm enamored with Ummagumma's innocence and naivete. They're a band adrift, confident in the round, curious in the studio, quintessentially 60s. Floyd haven't had this sense of fun about them since Piper, and spoiler alert, they're never gonna have it again. They don't know to be embarrassed of their wacky ideas yet. That much I love. With Ummagumma, Pink Floyd ensured no one could ever dance to their music again. My personal favorites off this one are Astronomy, Careful with That Axe, Sisyphus, Grantchester Meadows, and The Narrow Way. Somehow, an album such as Ummagumma proved to EMI that indulging in Pink Floyd's odd shit worked. As far as sales went, at least. It justified a bigger budget to spend even more money on odd shit. Ummagumma's follow-up was set to be bigger than anything they'd attempt before or since, requiring a small army to record and a labyrinth to navigate reproducing it live. Such a mammoth project as this required its minotaur. A beast of a cover for a beast of an album, and that ferocious beast was a dairy cow? Okay. So in May of 1969, before Ummagumma is even out, Roger says this to the melody maker, quote, "Among other things we want to do is use an orchestra. We've already had preliminary discussions with the Royal Philharmonic, and they are really keen. They really want to do it." Huge buzz. They were also in talks with the Boston Philharmonic at the time. Now, back in April of 1967, the Floyd played the 14-hour Technicolor Dream, part of which was filmed and included in Let's Make Love in London. Also on the bill was composer / banjo virtuoso Ron Geeson. They didn't actually meet. Ron explained, quote, "Our fields of interest differed, and I can tell you that our aims differed too." Sam Jonas Cutler set up Nick and Ron's meeting in 1968. Nick introduced Ron to Roger. Together, they scored documentary The Body. In connecting the film's producer with Ron and therefore Roger, John Peel unintentionally facilitated the first Pink Floyd solo venture, predating Madcap by a year and a half. This soundtrack features perhaps the deepest Pink Floyd cut, Give Birth to a Smile, and a very early version of Breathe in the Air. Around this time, Floyd were also lined up to score a Yellow Submarine-style children's series called Rollo, but it never made it past the pilot. Roger is still really hung up on this orchestra and choir thing from performing The Man in the Journey. And let's be real, the rest of the guys not making that happen. When Ron tried to get Dave, Rick, and Nick enthusiastic about classical music by taking them to see Wagner's Parsifal, they all fell asleep.
E minor, alright, yeah!
Ron, that's the guy staying awake. That's the guy who's gonna make this happen. Adam Hart Mother is born. Okay. Let's address the elephant in the room. Or, rather, that damn cow. This is Lulu Bell III. She lived in a field in Essex until one morning she became the most famous cow in rock and roll history. In Schaffner's book, Storm Thorgerson claimed him and Floyd wanted to be as unpsychedelic as possible. This was a concerted effort. He repeated this claim in Blake's book and his own. The most likely thought process was what Dave recalled Storm saying, quote, "Let's just do a cover that's completely meaningless, has no meaning whatsoever. What's the most meaningless thing we can do? Boom! Cow ass!" Storm took a drive one morning and hopped a fence to photograph the first cow he saw. It happened to be lovely Lulu Bell. He thought of her as, quote, "the ultimate picture of a cow. It's just totally cow." God, I love this guy. Favorite side character in the Pink Floyd universe by far. The guys were in on the joke. The EMI execs. Upon presenting the cover, one of them exploded on Storm. Quote, "He went apoplectic, the vein in his neck stood out, and he was screaming his head off at the guys." What's a cow got to do with Pink Floyd? Are you f***ing mad? The director of the record division, L.G. Wood, had a much calmer reaction, saying, Frisians, referring to the breed of Holstein, Lulu Bell, and our friends from the cold open are. Storm blamed the whole thing on Floyd, which, if you know anything about the guy, you'll know that's the most Storm Thorgerson thing ever. About the cover, he said, quote, "I think they were one of the few bands who at the time could get away with this kind of rubbish." Original copies of Adam Hart Mother don't have the band name or album title. Apparently this was Storm's condition to letting Floyd have the cow shot. Somewhere along the way, US copies and represses like mine got the name and title anyway. I like that the font kind of looks like a lasso. On Atom Heart Mother, we have Roger Waters on bass, plus guitar and lead vocals on If, David Gilmour on guitar, plus bass, drums, and lead vocals on Fat Old Son, Rick Wright on piano, organ, mellotron, and lead vocals on Summer 68, and Nick Mason on drums, percussion, and sound effects. Our special guests include Ron Geeson, who provided the band and choir arrangements, the EMI Pops Orchestra and John Aldous Choir, and Alan Stiles playing the kitchen? Breakfast? Executive producer Norman Smith is credited, but according to Dave, this was the band's smart-ass way of saying Norm didn't actually do anything. Atom Heart Mother was produced by Pink Floyd, engineered by Peter Bone, and Alan Parsons... Moo. As much of a roller coaster as The Man in the Journey and Ummagumma were, the guys still liked the idea of one big composition in several movements. A very prog thing to do. And if Rick quoted for the Melody Maker in September of 1970 is any indication, Atom Heart Mother was very much a response to Ummagumma's pitfalls. They wanted to pivot the idea into something more listenable. Quote, Ummagumma had more emphasis on pure sound. This one is much simpler to listen to. It is more emotional, a sort of epic music in fact, because we have added brass and a choir. This will sell more than the last. I think. A couple chapters ago, I referenced Brian Morrison selling his agency to Nems and Vic Lewis. Vic was old school. He commissioned this orchestra does the Beatles thing, a la Deerham trying to get the Moody Blues to make a rock and roll Dvorak's New World Symphony. Just as the Moodies were rightfully horrified by the idea of Dvorak rock, Floyd were horrified by Vic's proposition of a stuffy orchestra playing their songs. They figured if they did the orchestra thing themselves with someone willing to indulge their vision, they'd avoid a butchering of the gnome. Rick for Melody Maker said, quote, At present, rock groups and orchestras are performing together, and it does not work at all, because people are trying to combine rock and classical music. The two go together like oil and water. John Lord has written for an orchestra. It was very clever. It was an odd mixture of music, a lot of it, that was strongly romantic, but then you had the rock group come in and crash. He tried and failed. And he will always fail, because he has not got the right approach. Why Ron Geeson to make this happen? Ron got the job because A, he knew 3/4 of the Floyd pretty well, B, those three guys were familiar with and liked his work, C, he was experienced with both electronic and orchestral music, and D, it was time to make another album, and he was just kind of there. In his own book, Ron said, It was obvious to me at that time that the group was getting close to running on empty. I wasn't so sure about this when I read about it in Comfortably Numb, but to be instrumental in January of 1970, Rick said, I'm very happy in what I'm doing, but I would like to try lots of other things. Sometimes I feel like leaving the business completely. Doing something else. Roger reflected those thoughts. He said in hindsight that he probably should have bailed on Floyd around here. Whether you actually believe him or think he's bluffing is completely up to you. But clearly the guys were getting antsy. Once Floyd returned from Zabriskie Point boot camp in Rome, they got to work rehearsing this idea Dave had. He called it Theme from an Imaginary Western. Until, of course, he heard Theme for an Imaginary Western. Then the working title was The Amazing Pudding, and it just kind of beefed up from there. Get ready for a lot of cow puns. Rod recycled a bass line from the Zabriskie Rejects, and in January of 1970, either the 17th, 18th, or 23rd, it depends on which book you read, The Amazing Pudding was performed for the first time. By late March, Ron Geeson was on board. Roger and Nick hammered out the backing track under the working title Untitled Epic for Ron to work from. But there was a problem. For some reason, EMI was under a tape ration. Instead of stopping and starting each movement, then splicing all the tape together at the end, our dear rhythm section had to do it all in one go. Nick was no human metronome. Raj wasn't much better. The tempo was all over the place. And they couldn't do shit about it because they just barely squeezed this recording in between tours of Europe and America. Aside from the barest of bones, including a first movement, a section with a choir suggested by Rick, and a funky section, Ron had free reign. He resorted to Steve O'Rourke for pointers while the guys were on tour. Together they deduced something big meant brass, solo cello, and a choir. Ron said, quote, "They handed me a backing track, and I wrote out a score for a choir and brass players sat in my studio," which he frequently refers to as his padded cell in his book. Quote, "Stripped to my underpants." Yeah, this guy's quite a character. Meanwhile, back with the Floyd, the US tour in May was typically disastrous. The truck with literally all of the band's gear in it was stolen in New Orleans. Busted down on Bourbon Street, set up like a bowling pin. Manager Steve O'Rourke had to bribe the police to get everything returned. I can't believe we haven't really mentioned Steve yet. A real heavy pusher, according to Ron. He's basically Floyd's equivalent to Peter Grant. In the middle of this touring chaos, Dave took on the sometimes agonizing task of producing Sid's second album, Barrett. Things had changed over the past year with Sid, and not for the better, having to constantly stop and start production because of his old band's touring schedule couldn't have helped this. And hey, you know that story of Sid dropping in during Wish You Were Here sessions? No eyebrows and all. He'd actually visited before during Adam Hart Mother sessions. But Ron recalls he was gone just as quickly as he came. Upon the guys returning in June, Ron presented the score. Floyd loved it. They booked time at EMI, sans Norman Smith. This was the first time they'd done such for a studio album, and they never looked back. But it might have been a tad too soon for Norm to leave the boys without adult supervision. For this session, Ron served as conductor. He did not, in fact, know how to conduct. Hilarity ensues.
And a 1, 2, 3, 4!
Ron wrote barely any dynamic markings into his score either. He just assumed they'd work it out in the studio. But the EMI Pops Orchestra were session guys. They play what's on the sheet and they leave. The players had no idea what they were supposed to be doing and they were not happy about it. In the case of Ron, an actual human sacrifice in the studio itself was being offered up. Whatever the fuss was, the band was milking it for all it was worth, and it was not pretty. Ron locked horns with a horn player, trying to physically fight him, and was ejected from the session. John Aldis, a real conductor, took his place. Though he wasn't due in until choir day, he just happened to be at EMI. God bless. On the day the choir were booked, Nick sheepishly pointed out that the first bar of Ron's sheet music was missing. Or at least he insisted it was. His beat 2 was everyone else's beat 1. Ron owned up to his goof in his book, saying, "I mistook beat 2 in section J." What he calls funky dung, for beat 1. That is to say, I took what turned out to be Mick Mason's snare drum strike on the offbeat, beat 2 in the bar, to be beat 1 in the bar, and wrote this whole section to the interpreted grid. When the end of the section was reached, I made a 3-4 bar to correct back into the more obvious 4-4. Later, if I had an extra hour or two in a quiet cupboard, I would have moved all the bar lines back one beat and everyone would have been happy. But time was tight, and I did not. Thinking back to what Rick said about rock groups and orchestras being like oil and water, did Ron and Floyd actually remedy the critiques Rick brought up? No! They repeated all the same mistakes! The band and orchestra being two separate entities was most definitely what caused this studio debacle. When all was said and done, and the A&R guy came around to hear what Floyd did that day, Roger hid a gramophone under the console and played a Big Band 78 record, passing it off as the new stuff. Incredible. No notes. Then it came time for the band themselves to record the real thing using the orchestra and choir tracks. Of course, they used a little bit of studio trickery. Nick shouting was merged with Rick's organ and run through his Leslie cabinet. Though this is a strange technique, it proves useful in the future. In June of 1970, The Amazing Pudding debuted at the Bath Festival of Blues and Progressive Music. Remember this photo of Pamela Des Barres from the Led Zeppelin 2 episode? Yeah, same festival. She was there with the top of the bill, Led Bloody Zeppelin. Not to be outdone by the Lead Balloon, our merry band of grass-fed stoners hauled a full choir and brass band out with them. What could possibly go wrong? To beat the inevitable traffic backed up for miles a la Woodstock, Floyd said f*** it and drove their convoy up the wrong side of the road. The coach bus transporting the orchestra and choir did not do that. They instead took a shortcut, which turned out to be a long cut. How long was it? 8.5 hours! Somehow, the coach bus gets to the grounds early. The fest was running egregiously late, as festivals most often do. Floyd was supposed to go on at 10:15 the night of June 27th. They didn't actually take the stage until somewhere between 3 and 5 a.m. on the 28th. The guys tried to snivel their way up the bill by negotiating with, quote, one wild-eyed guitar hero. Judging by who was on the bill that night, my best guess is Johnny Winter, but negotiations didn't work out. And once they finally got on stage, some bellend poured a beer down the bell end of a tuba. On July 16th, the suite was recorded by John Peel at the Paris Theatre. I believe this is on the early years deviation as well. This would be a rehearsal for their Hyde Park show a couple days later. On the 26th, Floyd headed out to Saint-Tropez for the Antibes Jazz Fest. They went back out for the Saint-Tropez Music Festival in August. And it seems the camera guy at Soundcheck had a little crush. Shout out to whoever that guy was, the Roger Waters girlies of TikTok, salute you! And thank you, Roger Waters, for seeing a camera and just choosing not to put your pants back on. I'm sorry. I'm a simple woman. During all of that June, July, August madness, Pathé Marconi releases the Best of Pink Floyd compilation. Oft forgotten in the Pink Floyd compilation canon, you might know it better as Masters of Rock. This was the first major reissue of Sid Floyd material a whole year before Relics. When it came time to record the rest, roadie Alan Stiles found himself in the midst of Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, recorded in part at Nick and Lindy's house. The dripping we hear is their faucet. In the 11th hour, Amazing Pudding, and therefore the rest of the album, still didn't have a proper title. An evening paper was passed to Roger by either John Peel or an engineer or someone else. Steve says something to the likes of, "Come on, man, there's gotta be a title in there. You can't seriously be calling this thing The Amazing Pudding." Roger flipped to a story about a pregnant woman outfitted with an atomic pacemaker, or something sci-fi and convoluted like that. From there, he deduced Adam, Hart, Mother. BBC producer Jeff Griffin said, quote, "We were saying, why? But the band were like, why not?" The track listing of Adam, Hart, Mother goes as follows. Opening up and closing side one, it takes up the entirety of side one, is the title track Adam, Hart, Mother, with movements Father's Shout, Breast Milky, Mother 4, Funky Dung, Mind Your Throats Please, and Remergence. After the album art was decided, the guys gave some sections cow-inspired names. Opening up side 2, we have If, followed by Summer 68. Then Fat Old Son, and the album closes with Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, with subtitles Rise and Shine, Sunny Side Up, and Morning Glory. Adam, Hart, Mother was released October 5th, 1970. In a very unusual move, Floyd trucked out to the States to tour the album September 20th through October 25th. Despite a giant cow billboard on the Sunset Strip, it peaked at just number 55 here in the States. Its lukewarm chart performance might have something to do with half the tour already having gone by. Those audiences got excited about the material, but couldn't go out and buy it themselves. In Floyd's home territory, wacky promo efforts went over much better. Said efforts included sending inflatable pink cow udders to stores and handlers parading dairy cows through the mall. In this photo, we see a cow being loaded onto a trolley with equally baffled and impressed Dave on board. In Floyd's home territory, Adam, Hart, Mother peaked at number 1. Adam, Hart, Mother. Adam, Hart, Mother was Pink Floyd's first number 1 record. You, Adam, Hart, Mother, were number 1.
I could not believe it. Out of all 50
Do not attack
bitches,
my fans, bitch.
Of the that I've seen, you don't have that many. So out of
And the best part about all of this, they played Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast live. They had a guy frying eggs on stage, and people paid money to see it. Alec Devoe for Rolling Stone said, quote, Adam Hart Mother is a step headlong into the last century and a dissipation of their collective talents. It's a stub of a review, but he tries to address the title track, quote, as impressionism, it's occasionally effective, but on a very imitative level. There are sounds that draw pictures, but as a whole, it's awful schmaltzy and a little vapid. Side 2 is, quote, generally worse, but praises Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast of all things? Okay. The scope of Floyd's tours before this, light shows and smoke bombs and all, pretty consistently bankrupted them. Adam Hart Mother going to #1 was what the guys needed to get out of debt. But they made an unfortunate blunder. They opted not to credit Ron Geeson. Quote, my conscious self was saying, I'm not concerned about having glory on a record sleeve, I'm concerned about having done a piece of work. But it would have done me some good if they had given me the credit. I believe they were a bit embarrassed about not being able to see the thing through themselves, and so they weren't up to crediting properly who had done the work. They repeated this mistake with Claire Torrey on Dark Side of the Moon, Great Gig in the Sky. She sued for her credit, which Ron did not. It was settled for an undisclosed, presumably hefty, amount of money. Stanley Kubrick wanted to use the title track of Adam Hart Mother for A Clockwork Orange, but he wanted to cut it up to fit the film. Roger said, either you get the whole thing as we recorded it, or you get nothing at all. Put a pin in this Kubrick connection for later. UK fans loved Adam Hart Mother. US fans didn't get it. As for Floyd themselves, quote, probably our lowest point artistically. Dave said it was, quote, a load of rubbish, to be honest with you. We were at a real down point. We didn't know what on earth we were doing or trying to do at the time. None of us. I think we were scraping the barrel a bit at that point. Nick started out keen on Adam Hart Mother, 2 sounds in January of 1971, quote, the faults are basically in the details, and I thought, overall, it was good. It has a very strange feel to it. Parts of it, like the ending, are a real ham, which I like. But his feelings cooled. About the title track, Nick said, quote, the kitchen sink must have been unavailable for session work. Unfortunately, it's 24 minutes long, and that his report card notes would be, good idea, could try harder. Ron Geeson admitted, quote, it wasn't how I envisioned it, but it was a good compromise. I wanted more punch, but then again, the Floyd always seemed to need that pastel wash on their music, even on the punchy stuff. Ron stayed friends with the band, or at least staved off the inevitable falling out with Roger for a little while. As for our breakfast chef, Alan, after a tour of the States with Floyd in '71, Alan just decided not to go home. He built a houseboat, docked it in California, and lived the rest of his life out there. It's a pretty sweet way to retire from road life. I was pleasantly surprised by how many people requested Adam Hart Mother. Like, sure, I knew the Tago Mago reveal would have people requesting Tago Mago for months, but Adam Hart Mother? Adam Hart Mother. The album Pink Floyd themselves don't like. You showed the hell up for this. Once you saw I Own Adam Hart Mother, you went hard for Adam Hart Mother, so here's Adam Hart fucking Mother. This album is controversial, even today. The Floyd fan base is divided between those who see it as fluffy, self-indulgent crap, and its defenders as equally pretentious and awful, and those hailing it as the second coming of Beefus Christ, and everyone else are heretics and non-believers. I'll admit, I have scoffed at Adam Hart Mother's defenders in the past. My prog reviews consistently perform really well, and I do not know why. I am not a trained musician, let alone in classical music, so I can't really explain to you the ins and outs of what's going on the title track. For that, I will occasionally defer to this chapter's godsend text, Ron Geeson's Flaming Cow, and I'll also be using timestamps since this is a very long piece. I felt the pressure going into Adam Hart Mother, but I was shocked by how into it I was. It begins similarly to Days of Future Past. They faded in on a reversed gong, we fade in on a low hum with what sounds like bells. If Adam Hart Mother were a classical work, Father's Shout would be its overture. It contains the piece's leitmotif, a theme we will come back to several times through the course of the song. The parts orbit each other, their paths begin wide and are gradually pulled together. There's less space between notes and parts, trumpets spiral until the planets meet. I only managed to count this thing in properly once without the sheet music. The syncopation moving into imaginary western is crazy. It sounds like there's a measure of 2 thrown in, but no, the triplets and placements of the rest just make it sound that way. I can imagine without dynamic marks written in, this part would have been a bitch to record. I love those last few spurts from the trumpets, creating a little shock when the band comes in. Geeson's score as a whole emphasizes irregularity. He's not super atonal with it, but he's not afraid to muck with syncopation. This movement works because when the band comes in, they're not trying to compete with the brass. Dave just plays chords, the rhythm section plays straight 4/4. Dave said the core motif reminded him of the Magnificent Seven theme. The horse galloping, police sirens, and Easy Rider motorcycle are a little too on the nose, but only emphasize the absurdity of the situation. Rick doesn't come in until after all that madness. He's subtle, he sticks to playing chords, but he bridges the gap between the ensemble and the guys. Roger introduces the second core motif of Adam Hart Mother on the bass. Rick takes custody of the for most of the rest of our time here, denoting the transition into the breast milky movement. The solo cello was a fantastic addition. I think Ron recognized this would be both a pretty organic counterpoint to Rick's electric instrument, making Roger's electric bass kind of a middle ground, being an electrified instrument with strings, and a way to ground this so far bombastic piece. A solo instrument is a little easier to connect with. It emotes. Roger reverts to his comfort zone soon enough with these big steps and lateral movements. Dave replaces the cello with his dreamy, echoing flits. Nick's drumming, getting gradually heavier and more pronounced, provides the necessary weight in the band's portion for the brass to come in and not stick out like a sore thumb. Rick's parts are layered in, further bridging the gap. Some classical flourishes on piano, some organ. I think the solo soprano denotes Mother 4, but it's a little tough to tell. I have to use the stopwatch on my phone for these things because I'm using my turntable. This is Vinyl Monday, after all. There are lots of open movements, extended notes, all nonverbal vocalizations over Rick's organ. The altos come in, gradually the rest of the choir. Having no lyrics, aside from the baritones doing the it might be a source of audio disconnect. At least I see how it could be. It reads as operatic, and operatic reads as stuffy. Nick's drumming through this movement is superb. I've always loved the hollow sound on his kit. I love the way he utilizes that. Something like Us and Them, which is focused on a more closed drum sound. He bubbles under the surface. He kind of flies under the radar through the Pink Floyd classic period for this reason. His roles on this track come right up. At 10 minutes and 12 seconds, Rick abruptly takes us out of the choir box and into Funky Dung, mostly a band jam. Roger modulates it into something very reminiscent of the last parts of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Floyd recycled their own stuff all the time. Even what Rick plays invokes Shine On You Crazy Diamond. What sets Funky Dung apart is the emphasis on the downbeat, like funk. 1970 was a big year for funk music. Sly and the Family Stone released arguably the genre-defining track, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. Funkadelic said free your mind and your ass will follow, As a result, funk was now in a lot more bands' vocabularies, including this one. The loose, easy feel Floyd wore so well is something the typical rock and roll listener can sink their teeth into. Everyone's in their comfort zone, especially Dave. Then we take a hard left turn. The choir gets weird with it. About this movement, Ron said, quote, "I wrote all the rhythmic phonetics against Pink Floyd's pre-recorded accompaniment to cavort, dialogue with, and generally enhance that irregularity. Where my bar lines occurred did not matter. They simply constituted markers in a grid with even lines every 4 beats to serve as a relative time map. Hence, the beat 1 debacle." This is a highlight of the record for me. You know by now that I have an affinity for people doing weird shit in the name of art. Art.
Boom. Oh, shikack, art. Did somebody mention art?
If I had a nickel for every time I referenced RuPaul's Drag Race in this finale, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? This shit works because of dynamics, hard textures, playing with consonant sounds, rolling R's, soft sounds like sh among hard ones, dark vowels. Ron takes language and breaks it down, like the parts of a cell as it actively splits. Ron was on some other shit for this. Atom Heart Mother is the album of sure, man, why the hell not? And this is the very essence of that. Hearing Rick on piano filling the spaces between the choir is a treat. At a certain point, you have to surrender to the absurdity, whether to enjoy or simply to get through this. This was when the absurdity won me over. It's like the Yellow Snow Suite the first time I listened to Apostrophe. Like, come on. We return to Western before Mind Your Throats. Ron says, "If you were unkind, you would say that the repeats were milking it, frantically paddling water waiting for the rescue boat. I call it a necessary return to the familiar before our spacewalk." Mind Your Throats, quote, suggests Waters, hank of hair hanging over his face, cigarettes smoldering between his fingers, hunched over the console at Abbey Road, teasing out as many shivery sound effects as he can. Don't threaten me with a good time. Playing with weird textures is a hallmark of experimental Floyd. Tape loops, sharp notes, eerie resonance, negative space, industrial blasts of steam. This has all of it. The final movement layers a highlights reel of the past 18 minutes with a constantly ascending band. Damn, okay. The tension might get the chance to build if there weren't quite so much going on over top. You can hear the recording technology straining. Some tracks get degraded. That's just what happens when you have to mix things down 2 or 3 times to fit on 8 tracks. The Sopranos, at exactly 23 minutes, fully lean into the sci-fi. And that's Atom Heart Mother. Cows in space. Sure. Side 2 opens with one of my favorite Pink Floyd deep cuts, If. Being the first song on side 2 of the LP after this great big production, it takes an important spot. These are also the first lyrics we hear on the whole record. With gentle finger-picking on guitar, Roger softly sings, "If I were a swan, I'd be gone. If I were a train, I'd be late. And if I were a good man, I'd talk with you more often than I do. Later, if I were a good man, I'd understand the spaces between friends." He expresses guilt for being so emotionally shut off from this person. Some people have said Sid. I give credit to this theory. And Roger does admit he's been closed off emotionally. "If I were alone, I would cry. If I were with you, I'd be warm and dry." Loneliness is a brave thing for any man to admit. Raj wrote his delivery off as Faye. It's a little odd he never flipped his R's before or since this song. It's almost sweet. He almost whisper sings, as if he's ashamed to admit vulnerability. Some points are, again, a little on the nose. See the machine whir when he sings, "If I go insane, please don't put your wires in my brain." Dave plays just the right stuff. His harmonic guitar squeals are at just the right level not to overpower the song. Rick hangs light finery on the walls. This is very well balanced. It's carefully assembled. Frank and confessional for our megaphone man. This moment means something. And it clearly meant something to Roger, too. He revived this number for his solo tours in the 80s. Ron said, "If shows more of the real Roger than all that bloody political shouting his head off. I think it shows a different facet of Roger. He's a multifaceted guy, as all people are. This is the man behind the curtain. Or the man behind the wall." Singing about the summer of 1968 was ancient history come 1970, and if summer 68 is any indication, Pink Floyd spent theirs with groupies. Quote, "In the summer of 68, there were groupies everywhere. They'd come and look after you like a personal maid, do your washing, sleep with you, and leave you with a dose of the clap." Clearly Rick doesn't think too highly of this one either. "From your bed I gained a day and lost a bloody year. Tomorrow brings another town, another girl like you. Have you time before you leave to greet another man?" He continually tries to pull her real feelings out of her, seeking interpersonal connection where there is none. It sounds sterile, clinical, horribly cold for having just spent the night together. They didn't say a word to each other. "Occasionally you showed me a smile, but what was the need?" And "How do you feel?" echoed many times. If you want to reach for the fruit a little bit, one could argue this groupie scene is a metaphor for the generational rejection of the free love attitude, an extension of the anti-psychedelic 60s cow, a glossing over individual feelings for the sake of the collective. It's us versus the man. Part of why the 70s were such a broad, sweeping turn inwards in visual aesthetics, songwriting, and political concerns is because of this. The arrangement is a little ambitious. I do appreciate Rick's effort to link side 2 of the album with side 1, but the horn setting on the organ through the song's back half overpower the lightness Rick has about him. His piano playing, his voice, there's not a square edge from which to hang a big ornate frame. One of the several issues that I take with Mark Blake's Comfortably Numb is his obsession with linking Floyd to what's going on in Laurel Canyon. He insists Fat Old Son is a response to Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Literally no. There is a twist of country, and yes, Dave did occasionally wear a fringe jacket. Rick wore whatever the hell this was. But this brand of folk music is distinctly British. It's more Led Zeppelin 3's blend of country and folk than CSN's. And if anything, if we're really trying to root this in America here, it's got a twinge of San Francisco. The Grateful Dead would incorporate steel guitar on their 1970 LP, American Beauty. For following a song called Summer 68, Fat Old Son feels a lot more hippie. It's a simple, pretty appreciation of nature from Dave. He even shouts out the smell of sweet mowed grass. Roll me up and lay me down. I love this guy. It reminds me of the Moody Blues Tuesday afternoon. This guy's just laid in the grass, watching the fat old sun set on a summer evening, and birds are calling, children's laughter. This solo is Dave's best work on the album. It's constructed simply with no frills. His barely audible humming dances around it, as does what I swore was a flute, but on further inspection is slide playing. These birdsong notes are off the fretboard. It's not about volume with Dave's playing. It's about touch. Focusing on the important things today. Marmalade. I like marmalade. Marmalade. I like marmalade. About Alan's psychedelic breakfast, Roger said, quote, "I've always felt that the differentiation between a sound effect and music is all a load of shit. Whether you make a sound on a guitar or a water tap is irrelevant." I think the psychedelic in Psychedelic Blues is a reference to juice. This might be a reach, but hear me out. Oh, 1 second. Gotta move my ashtray. In the electric Kool-Aid acid test, I'm Abigail Devoe. Of course I have a first edition copy of the Electric Kool-Aid acid test. Come on. Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters mixed acid with whatever sweet drink they had on hand. Acid makes sweet things taste very good, especially citrus. Never mind how I know that information. Or maybe the psychedelic breakfast is the first meal after we were up all night tripping. In this, do you call it musique concrète, or is it just a field recording? We follow roadie Alan as he makes a full breakfast, and it's oddly endearing. The music is nice, especially Rick on piano. It invokes images of morning, with the rays of sun shining through a foggy window and the cool breeze still lingering. The star of the show is Alan. He bumps into the corner of a table, mumbles to himself about macrobiotics. He pours a bowl of cereal, fries eggs, sausage, bacon, and tomatoes. He puts the coffee on and makes toast, and quite audibly scarfs it down. It makes me think of the mornings I spent after a night out in college. There was this diner on Main Street that would open at 4 a.m. 7 days a week. It was the place we'd all go to after a night out. I remember the walls were yellow, the booths were green, all the cups and dishes were chipped, and we probably looked like hell, but no one cared. They gave us our eggs and toast and coffee in the pot as we mumbled among ourselves. Maybe Alan's psychedelic breakfast is frivolous and silly and takes up worthy space on the LP. I think it invokes a nice memory. Even I wonder how Atom Heart Mother was Pink Floyd's first #1 album. Why does Atom Heart Mother get such a bad rep? The cover, for one, it's trolling on the level of Duchamp presenting an upside-down urinal as art. Either you're in on the joke or you're not. Dave said the album was a failure in this sense. People know the cover better than they know the music on the record. I also think this has to do with how listeners perceive high prog today, particularly the orchestra rock subset. Coming from the distant future, some of this stuff aged like milk. The orchestra rock thing can read as dated. The Moody Blues built their whole golden age off orchestra rock. But not all were as lucky as them. ELP did pictures at an exhibition and were trashed for it. Floyd only tried on orchestra rock for size, and again, the results are divisive. Floyd were put on a high pedestal, starting around this time, when the stuffy critics of their day said, "Rock and roll doesn't mean anything, it's just a passing fad." Floyd were pretty consistently on their short list of rock and roll bands who did mean something. Heart Mother reinvented these guys from snot-nosed stoners to sophisticates. Ergo, something like Atom Heart Mother put a glaring spotlight right on them. The pure scope of side 1 renders this whole album a Roger Waters Ron Geeson collab featuring the rest of Pink Floyd. I see the Atom Heart Mother detractors' point. I appreciate Atom Heart Mother for all the chances it takes. A 24-minute orchestral suite with a rock and roll band, a brass section, a solo cello, tape loops, and a full choir filling out the entirety of side 1, and a guy making his breakfast on side 2. But its own sense of humor might negate that anyway. This album takes the piss out of itself before you can. The music is the most demanding of the listener that these guys put to tape, but I like it for that. The album and the band who made it have balls. Why Atom Heart Mother? Fuck you, that's why. My personal favorites on this one are... It's only 5 tracks, let's just say the whole thing. I find it hilarious that one of the few things the surviving members of Pink Floyd can agree on these days is dunking on Atom Heart Mother. There's so little common ground, but by the end of 1970, the shared frustration with how this thing turned out started to take hold. They abandoned their spacesuits for overalls and muck boots. But did that really work? We don't want to be space rock, but we also don't want to be orchestra prog. Much as Roger would like to, I'm sure, we can't continue heckling the audience every time someone requests Interstellar. Something's gotta change here. I don't know what it's gonna take to... Oh my god, it's Roger's birthday. I am filming this on Roger's birthday. Happy fucking birthday, you prick! Yeah, get ready for some crazy lighting in this chapter. We have a storm blowing in as we speak, and this is the only day I have to film this chapter. So what is this cover anyway? An ocean, sand dunes, I know I wasn't alone in thinking it was a camel. From Nick. On a stopover at Hong Kong airport heading home from tour, we phoned the Hypnosis studio to brief Storm on the cover design. Maybe inspired by some zen-like image of water gardens, we told Storm we wanted an ear underwater. Even across the intervening miles, we could hear the sound of Storm's eyes rolling. So that's what they got, an abstracted close-up of an ear with water superimposed over it to look like sound waves. The colors of the original covers remind me of those late summer sunsets where the sky is blue, but the clouds are so pink and orange they look brown. Mine is a slight recolor, with the browns replaced by purple. You don't get the full effect of the image unless you fold the jacket out this way. For the rest of his life, Storm asserted Meddle was the worst album cover he ever made. It's gotta be better than his own crass suggestion. A close-up of a baboon's anus. Even Aubrey Powell, typically the more diplomatic of the collective, said the cover was, quote, a mess. But I like to think it was a response to the Adam Hart Mother cover. Something as abstracted as this couldn't possibly overshadow the music. Opening up the gatefold this way, we have photography also by Hypnosis, and the guys deemed the occasion formal enough to wash their hair. Yeah, 1971 was a pretty greasy year for Pink Floyd. On Meddle, we have Roger Waters on bass and lead vocals on Saint-Tropez, David Gilmour on guitar, lead vocals, harmonica, and bass on One of These Days. Rick Wright plays piano, organ, and sings co-lead vocals on Echoes, and Nick Mason plays drums, percussion, and takes, I guess you would call it, lead vocals on One of These Days. Our very special guest for this album is Seamus the dog, who takes lead howl. Yeah, let's call it that. Lead howl on Seamus. And Meddle was produced by Pink Floyd themselves. So let's recap. More was a film soundtrack, Ummagumma was a botched studio live project, and Adam Hart Mother was largely a collab with Ron Geeson. We haven't had a full, standalone LP of Pink Floyd studio material yet. As you can probably imagine, playing the Adam Hart Mother suite live got stale fast. We went through a stage of depression through the last few months, a sort of stagnation which occurs to everybody, but now we are going ahead again. It's very important for the band to keep together musically and not drift apart. The next project would be a direct response to what they believed was Adam Hart Mother's bloated nature. Dave said, quote, "Something on the scale of Adam Hart Mother really takes a lot of getting together. The problem is that we've never done it more than twice with the same people. The choir is usually alright because they're used to working together, but some of the brass people have been really hopeless." They booked time at EMI in January of 1971. Never mind the fact that they didn't actually have any songs written. Anytime the guys had something even slightly resembling an idea, they'd go into the studio and cut it. First came Household Objects, a project made entirely with, you guessed it, household objects. Wine Glasses was one of the more successful ventures. Elastic bands and lighters, not so much. By May, that idea was out. Dave said, "We got a lot of stuff down, enough for a whole side, I think, but we've had some disagreement over it, and I think the general opinion seems to be that it is not quite right for this LP. We got some jolly good sounds, though, and it would be fun to show people what with a little thought they could get out of things they've got lying around the house." After that idea failed, they took a page from Zappa's book. They could play whatever they wanted so long as it was in the same key, but the catch was they couldn't hear what the guy before them had recorded. I love these guys, but none of them are Zappa-level musicians, let alone the guy that needed Rick to tune his bass for him. This didn't work either. How are they allowed to do this, or any of the nonsense they've pulled so far? If you'll remember from the Piper episode, there was one very unusual stipulation in Floyd's original contract with EMI. Though they'd have to pay out of pocket, as was customary for studios at the time, Floyd had unlimited studio time and could do whatever they wanted with it. Eventually, and through much more conventional means, the guys produced 30-some-odd song fragments. but still no song. On May 15th, 1971, the guys play a gig at London's Crystal Palace. Naturally, the band continues their Spinal Tap shenanigans. Their grand finale was a 50-foot inflatable octopus rising from the bottom of the lake. The dry ice killed all the fish in said lake, and some long-suffering roadie had to swim out to untangle the octopus's tentacles. Aside from the mollusk blunder, the gig was most notable for Floyd debuting their joining together of their 30-some-odd song fragments. Return of the Son of Nothing. This piece was a response to the hell it was to stage Atom Heart Mother live. No choir, no brass, no strings. It was pretty easy to replicate. If this review from Sounds can be relied on, the gig went over pretty well. As the magic of the first half hour began to fade, the Floyd's music took over as the dominant force, building moods of deep intensity, opening out wide, spacey areas, pushing out great waves of sound across the water and dead fish, to the back of the Natural Bowl Arena and beyond. Return of the Son of Nothing, soon to be known as Echoes, didn't come all at once. It was a series of epiphanies, or rather happy accidents. One day in the studio, Rick was noodling around with a piano hooked up to a Leslie cabinet. Usually he had the Leslie hooked up to his Hammond organ. To his surprise, hitting a certain note on the keys produced a certain resonant. The middle section of whale noises was discovered by accident too. Dave wasn't paying attention and swapped the input and output of his wah-wah. Engineer Dave Leckie helped work out a creepy rising delay effect with 2 tape recorders. He ran the tape through both machines in sequence, then played one back on the other and got a sound like this. Recording was broken up by a lot of touring, namely Germany from February through March. When asked how recording was going, Dave said, "We are letting things take a natural pace. We're refusing to take any pressure on the album. If people ask us about a release date, we just tell them they can have it when it's ready." At a certain point, it became clear to EMI that between Floyd's touring schedule, creative block, and less than fantastic work ethic, that this album was gonna take a while. So, let me get this out. Relics! This was massively helpful for new fans wanting to get into the Sid Floyd period. It's still helping new fans today. This was how I first heard the B-side version of Careful With That Axe and On Old Lane had a strange hobby. It featured just one new tune, Biding My Time, quote, in which Rick finally inflicted his trombone playing upon us. Though the guys were booked at EMI, most of the operation was brought to George Martin's Air Studios. This was the first time Floyd ever had access to 16-track recording technology. Dave lobbied for 16-track all the way back in the Ummagumma days. They turned him down on the grounds of it being too experimental / too expensive. Atom Heart Mother used 8 tracks, and all the ones before that album used 4. EMI was famously slow to adopting new technology. See George Harrison having to bring his own 8-track machine from home for the Get Back project. Echoes was the first track completed for what would become Meddle. It was finished on June 2nd, between tours through Europe again that month. Like finishing Tomorrow Never Knows first shaped the rest of Revolver, finishing Echoes would shape the rest of what would become Meddle. The guys tour through Japan and Australia in August. The Japan air footage makes the Roger girlies go fucking feral. Don't even get me started on the press conference photos. On the Australian leg of tour, Floyd met director George Greenough. He was making a film about surfing and wanted a soundtrack. They gave him Echoes. The Crystal Voyager film wasn't Echoes' last appearance on film. Director Adrian Mabin's vision began as Floyd setting music to the works of popular surrealists. Magritte, Tanguy, De Chirico. You know yours truly would have loved to see that, but alas, it wasn't to be. Mabin held on to the art history angle though, but changed the medium, location, and time period. Adrian took a trip to Italy, in which he lost his passport at the ruins of Pompeii. He convinced producer Rainer Moritz to fund a TV special. It was touted to Floyd as the anti-Woodstock. It doesn't get much more anti-Woodstock than no audience. And they agreed, on the condition they'd play it 100% live. Of course Adrian agreed to that. Why wouldn't you want to be the guy who got to film a live Pink Floyd set? Though we're only doing it if it's a live set thing would prove to be the bane of Pink Floyd and the film crew's existence. Due to a comical, truly quintessentially Floyd amount of setbacks, including but not limited to equipment issues, the operation just not having fucking power for the first 3 days of a 10-day shoot, said TV special being rejected, and some moron accidentally destroying the footage of one of these days. How do you screw up that badly? The guys were left with just partial footage from October 3rd through October 7th. Nevertheless, those few days on location in Pompeii, plus a soundstage in Paris in December and interviews in the spring of 1972, captured rock and roll history. I wish I could talk more about Pompeii here, but we literally cannot. We are cruising into 3-hour video territory as is. I do have a review of this year's Live at Pompeii release on trackingangle.com if that interests you. It was my first published piece of written work, and I'm still very proud of it. In any way, Pompeii was the defining performance of Floyd's experimental period. It captured the definitive recording of the yet-to-be-released at the time echoes. There are definitive versions of old favorites, Set the Controls and Saucerful of Secrets. Both wouldn't last long in Floyd live sets after this. Adrian was absolutely right to make Floyd resurrect Saucerful of Secrets purely so he could film Roger and the Gong. It's the iconic shot of the film. What people don't talk as much about, even if it got the most laughs from the audience in the theater on the re-release, is how this film caught the band dynamics at the time.
The oysters are good, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, there's good oysters here, aren't there?
Yes.
The oysters are very good.
Yes, this time of year.
I like to think that oysters transcend national barriers.
Particularly the full band attitude towards the press.
What do you mean happy?
Chris Charlesworth for Q Magazine said, quote, Floyd maintained a sort of aloof, couldn't care less attitude, as if courting the press and giving interviews was somehow beneath them. While Zeppelin adopted their we'll do it our way and show the fucking press we don't need them stance. With the Floyd, it was more of a disdainful, press? Do we really have to do that sort of thing? To pad out their sidelong piece, Floyd throws some other numbers in. One of These Days, A Pillow of Winds, Fearless, and of course some typical Floyd shenanigans. Dave was dog-sitting for friend of the band Steve Marriott of the Small Faces. Steve's dog Seamus howled whenever he heard music. Dave thought this was so funny, so one day Seamus went on a little field trip to EMI. The guys hit up Europe again in September, the US late October through November. There's a great moment from a bootleg of the Halloween show in Toledo where, after Careful with That Axe, someone in the audience says, okay. Appropriate reaction to the Roger Waters and Hell scream. What else happened on that tour? For several years now, Dave had been the lone bachelor of the band. Other guys were certainly bachelors in practice. This is a rock and roll band in the 1970s we're talking about here. But legally speaking, Dave was the last man standing until tour stopped in Ann Arbor, Michigan on October 28th, 1971. There, Dave met model and aspiring actress Virginia Hasselbein, aka Ginger. I don't know what Dave said to snag her, but in all of 3 days, Ginger gave up her whole life to be with him and be Ginger Gilmore. Sidebar, Ginger is an artist now. Her use of color makes me really miss being an artist, and she signed her book for me. Wait, hold on. I have her book, and she signed it for me. Thank you, Ginger. Very cool. Dave meeting Ginger may seem insignificant, but all 4 guys being spoken for sets up a greater change of attitude within Floyd. They're married, having kids. It's time to grow up now. Like its cover. The album title wasn't thought out too well. It's meant to be a pun on Meddle, something you win, and meddle, to butt in on business that's none of your business. Huh. The baboon cover makes more sense now. The track listing of Meddle goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have One of These Days, followed by A Pillow of Winds, then Fearless, Saint-Tropez, and side 1 closes with Seamus. Taking up the entirety of side 2 is Echoes. Meddle was released in late October of 1971 in the US, early November in the UK. Strangely, once again, this was released while Floyd were in the middle of a US tour. One of These Days, backed with Fearless, was the US single. Remember, after the spectacular flop of Point Me to the Sky, Floyd went no contact with the UK singles market, but they didn't need a single. Meddle peaked at number 3 in the UK. Not quite Atom Heart Mother at number 1, but still pretty good. As for the States, it hovered around the 70s before slipping off the charts. Meddle left a lasting impression on those American audiences who heard it, like Jean-Charles Costa for Rolling Stone. Quote, Pink Floyd has finally emerged from the Atom Heart Mother phase, a fairly stagnant period in their musical growth marked by constant creative indecision. Costa appreciates Floyd paring it down. You'd never think they were paring it down considering there's a 24-minute song on here, but there's no choir. He also identifies this album's direction, from, quote, ozone ballads to admittedly formulaic but still spectacular One of These Days, as being driven by Dave. Quote, Killer Floyd from start to finish. Alan Evans for NME cited Echoes as the ultimate highlight of the album, the quote, zenith which the Floyd have been striving for. Pink Floyd have done it again, something I thought would be difficult after the brilliance they showed with the Atom Heart Mother suite. Melody Maker, however, was not so keen. Michael Watts's review starts out strong with, quote, one can't help but feel that Pink Floyd are so much sound and fury, signifying nothing. He praises most everything else the Floyd have done to date, though he misspells Astronomy Domini as Astronomo. He asserts Floyd are best in that space rock niche and isn't happy they've deviated. Quote, stripped of the sense of Ethera, the music hardly stands up as more than competent rhythmic rock. The guys are, quote, unable to cope with the sort of pithy statement that is necessary to the 5-minute pop single, leave Sid out of this! When they do indulge in Ethera, it pales in comparison to... Everyone drags the Flying Burrito Brothers for having an awful name. I present to you Tonto's Expanding Headband. Echoes little more than, quote, a series of effects without any underlying depth. So let me get this straight. He wants the band to be capable of a, quote, pithy statement necessary to pop songwriting, but he also wants the signature noodling, make up your mind. It seems the guys took this review to heart in what I can only describe as a cartoonishly juvenile stunt. A gift box arrived to the Melody Maker offices addressed to Watts. He sat at his desk, pulled the bow off, and out popped a boxing glove on a spring. If I had a nickel for every time a figure in the music industry was sent a prank gift by another figure in the music industry for writing off an act's music, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but boy, there are a lot of man-children in rock and roll. It's worth noting in a Q magazine piece in the 90s that I have cited in this video, Watts says the glove was meant for the Atom Heart Mother review. Judging by the fact that he did not write an Atom Heart Mother review for Melody Maker, I literally have his Meddle review from November of 1971 in this video, and Saucerful of Secrets, Comfortably Numb, and Inside Out all say it was revenge for a Meddle review. I'm inclined to agree Watts has misremembered this detail. About Meddle, Nick said, quote, certainly, compared to its predecessor, Atom Heart Mother, Meddle seems refreshingly straightforward. You know, except for the live shows. A magician, juggler, and fire breather open the show. You can say a lot about our birthday boy Roger Waters, but you can't say he's not consistent. Of the 4 albums covered today, I was most familiar with this. I have it pretty consistently ranked in my top 5 Floyd LPs, at times usurping Animals in my ranking. One of These Days opens with 30 seconds of one of the sounds Pink Floyd will trademark in the next few years. The wind machine slowed to half speed. It fades in, gradually building in intensity until one slip-cut note of the bass and a stray note on organ. Of all the many blunders of Pompeii production, losing most of One of These Days has to be the worst. I longed to see the effects pedal that made that sound. Roger fed his bass through an Echo Rec that's in the right channel of the LP. Dave is double tracking it in the left. You can hear the slight differences in their playing styles. Dave handles the instrument more like a guitar, and it helps build that momentum. Is that the fucking Doctor Who theme? I can't with these guys. I can't! One of the symptoms of Floyd's unlimited studio time was wasting a lot of said time watching TV in the studio. See them funding Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! Just a flesh wound.
Jean-Charles Costa is absolutely right. One of These Days is classic Pink Floyd formula. Ambient noise, build-up, quiet parts, sound effect, big finish. What sets One of These Days and this album's closer above that formula is that it does two things that the Floyd were best at in this stage of their career: atmosphere and tension and release. Think of classical music. There's tension and release all over the place. Coincidentally, Delia Derbyshire, one of the composers of the Doctor Who theme, briefly worked with Peter Sinoviev, one of the developers of the VCS3. Neil Young's one-note guitar solos, however much I make fun of them, accomplish the same thing as Roger and Dave's one-note thing here. The payoff of One of These Days I'm going to cut you into little pieces doesn't come without an expert build first. The reverse echo makes it sound like it's flying past us. Then come Nick's backwards echo cymbals, an impossibly thin texture. And the first hit of Dave's snarling slide guitar. This is so unlike his style, it's unusually aggressive, but the change is very welcome. They're beefed up by Nick's hard drum hits, which drop out for a full-bodied double-tracked slide. You get the sense it's not quite the drum's time yet. We reach the quiet part of the Floyd formula when everything drops out for Roger's bass and just a little bit of white noise. A cheat code to show you how the tension builds is how you feel when all those elements drop out. The menacing static, feedback, and reverse synths threaten to pull you back into the rip current. The drums come back, you sense they mean it this time, then... How the hell did they do that? Nick said it fast in a really high voice so that when they slowed it down, it would sound right. I haven't seen this on any source in my list, but I'm pretty sure they slapped some backwards echo on this as well. The rip current is too strong. We are sucked back screaming. Let me break down the layers for you. We have forwards drums, backwards drums, at least one bass track, if not two, maybe one track backwards, but I only hear it for a few seconds. It's barely audible, but Rick's on piano. We absolutely hear him on organ. He is shredding through this. And 1, 2, 3 tracks of guitar, the double-tracked slide and Dave's solo on top of it. That's the power of 16-track recording. Having to mix this thing down to, say, 8 would have diminished its sheer momentum. And it's all balanced perfectly. As much as I love Pompeii One of These Days, since they were playing it live, they didn't have as much wiggle room. They couldn't have all those layers of sound. There's only 4 of them. The keys are pushed so far forward in that mix that the engine doesn't have the same drive as on the LP. It crashes back into the wind machine, our segue into A Pillow of Winds. The Floyd Wags were avid mahjong players. I guess that's where the title came from. It's certainly more erudite than working title Dave's guitar thing. Dave's not the strongest lyricist. I think we can all safely say that. Mike the Snare said something along the lines of, as a guitarist, David Gilmour is one of the greatest of all time. As a lyricist, he is. It's easy to write his contributions off, especially in this period of the band, but Pillow of Wind's opening lyric is of interest. A cloud of eiderdown draws around me, softening the sound. I have only heard the word eiderdown in one other song lyric in my entire life. Alone in the clouds all blue, lying on an eiderdown. Yippee, You can't see me, but I can you. The music invokes the lyric. Lush, winsome layers of Dave's guitar, acoustic, electric, and slide. A sparse amble bass, like the vine from which the flowers bloom. It's a little folk, a little country. At surface level, Pillow of Winds is a love song. Sleepy time when I lie with my love by my side and she's breathing low and the candle dies. A simple, intimate moment. I sense paranoia, though, from the key change. When night comes down, you lock the door, your book falls to the floor. As darkness falls and waves roll by, the seasons change, the wind is warm. A beautiful night, but there's uncertainty in the darkness. Now wakes the owl, now sleeps the swan. Behold the dream is gone. Wisdom usurps beauty. Life experience begets a new, more mature outlook. This is one of my favorite lyrics that Dave has ever written. You're staying up all night feeling this, while she's unaware, fast asleep beside you. The tension resolves, though, when she wakes with the morning sun. I find Fearless tough to settle into, with the constantly ascending riff building up and dropping down, a cymbal to mark. It reaches the top only for it to fall back down to the bottom, kind of like Sisyphus and his rock. It's not pleasing to my ear, but I like all the guitar textures I'm hearing. Fearlessly, the idiot faced the crowd smiling, adds the caveat of, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. As stated by Andy Cush for Pitchfork, the lyric, quote, focuses on the quiet dignity of an idiot following his own path up a hill, while the crowd jeers from below that he'll never make it to the top. About including reverse-echoed You'll Never Walk Alone, a Liverpool fan chant on the record, Nick said he found it, quote, odd. Roger was so keen to do this, considering that he was a committed Arsenal fan. Several texts on my reading list were either just as baffled or went to truly comical lengths to analyze it. I'll give you the answer. On May 8th, 1971, while the guys were recording Meddle, Arsenal and Liverpool played the FA Final Cup at Wembley Stadium. Arsenal won. So the Liverpool chant is in the song to rub Arsenal's win in. George Roger Waters, you petty bitch, I love you. I don't have anything to say about Saint-Tropez. I don't want to give too much credit to the birthday boy. Literally, why was this given space on the record? As amazing as Dave's playing is sounding on this album, the real MVP is obviously Seamus. Good boy. That is all I have to say about Seamus. Illimitable ocean without bound, without dimension, where length, breadth, and height, and time and place are lost. Where eldest night and chaos, ancestors of nature hold, eternal anarchy, and so on. Paradise Lost is a really long poem. Where else would you find references to RuPaul's Drag Race, Phineas and Ferb, Marcel Duchamp, SpongeBob SquarePants, and John Milton in the same video? If that's not a reason to subscribe to this channel, I don't know what is. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. I have been waiting for this moment. The entire time I have been talking about music, writing a minimum of 6,500 words about music a week for 4 years now. Fucking finally, I finally get to tell you why Echoes is the best Pink Floyd song. It's the reason Meddle exists, for one. So many subsequent breakthroughs happened because of the song that was stitched together. The funk section, with Dave's simplest but lengthiest, most layered guitar work among his best. Those fucking whale noises, how the instrumentation is thrust up from the deep through the last third of the song. I have been known to ugly cry at Dave's arpeggios when they finally break through. It's such a feeling of hope. Each and every movement exemplifying Nick's understated, overlooked expertise on his instrument, showing the full breadth of what he could do. The music of Echoes was driven by Dave and especially by Rick. There's a reason that Pink Floyd never performed Echoes again after Rick's passing. Nick said, quote, Rick once summed up his musical philosophy by saying, technique is so secondary to ideas. Many fine keyboard players could and did emulate and recreate his parts, but nobody else other than Rick had the ability to create them in the first place. It was he who, completely by accident, played one note that birthed an entire album. Rick's voice sounds like it was ran through his Leslie cabinet on the final verse, just adding to that beautiful watery effect. Meddle really is the Leslie album. They should have just called this thing Leslie. Roger. He originally wrote the lyrics in the vein of Astronomy Domini, realizing he wanted to ditch the pesky space rock label, and taking note of how the song was taking shape, he switched the theme from outer space to underwater. Rick and Dave sing in lilting harmony. Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless upon the air, and deep beneath the rolling waves, a labyrinth of coral caves. Sorry, I have to throw that extra syllable in labyrinth. The echo of a distant time comes willowing across the sand, and everything is green and submarine. All the lyrics didn't quite make it out of space, though. No one flies around the sun. The verse and chorus is another expert build in tension and release, so subtle you don't feel it until it pulls back. Dave delivers a descent-ascent riff, so simple but so good. Andrew Lloyd Webber plagiarized it for Phantom of the Opera. No, really. We know rock and roll was on Andrew Lloyd Webber's radar. See rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar. Love me some Jesus Christ Superstar. Roger said he probably should have sued, but deduced that, quote, "Life's too long to bother with suing Andrew fucking Lloyd Webber." I first heard Echoes my junior year of college, a very bohemian time in my life, as I've detailed. My first semester of my junior year of college coincided with the last few months before the pandemic. We're gonna try saying that in a video and see what happens. If you are my age and you were in school at that time, I think you'll agree that in hindsight, we all sensed something big was on the horizon. Of course, we didn't know what. We were all too drunk, high, young, and stupid to have even a lick of foresight. But to the older and younger folk who watch my videos, I recognize that my audience is pretty evenly split between boomers and zoomers born after 9/11. September 2019 through February of 2020 had this party at the end of the world atmosphere. That year of college, I lived in this L-shaped apartment with 6 other people. It was an outdoor complex. It was disgusting. Since my bedroom was in the tail of the L and right up against the sidewalk, I had too many drunks pissing on my lower window. I'd gone through the worst breakup of my life 3 months before moving in. You probably see where this is going. Clearly, I was headed straight for a fall. I hit the ground hard. The music scoops up into the second verse. Strangers passing in the street, by chance 2 separate glances meet, and I am you, and what I see is me. And do I take you by the hand and lead you to the land, and help me understand the best I can. 20 years old and drunk, laying on the floor while your 6 foot by 9 foot bedroom spins around you like the rest of your life is. Imagine hearing Echoes for the first time under those circumstances. How could it not become the best Pink Floyd song? There you stood on the edge of your feather, expecting to fly. While I laughed, I wondered whether I could wave you goodbye. Jewels and binoculars hang from the head of the mule, and these visions of Joanna make it all seem so cruel. And that lyric from Echoes, man. Those are my favorite sets of lyrics ever written. That one verse, Strangers Passing in the Street, is Roger Waters' entire mission statement. Inspiration for this new lyric came when Roger had just moved to London. He felt a bit disconnected from it all. Remember his friend group? He was definitely an outlier for having only done acid twice. He felt disconnected from the scene that his band was a fixture of. And that feeling macerated when Sid left. The lonely journeys of individuals in a cruel, brutal, lonely world. Critics have been harping on that for decades as it pertains to Roger's writing, but I'd argue that the crux of Roger's writing is the need to find connection in that brutal, lonely world. Think Pigs on the Wing too. You know that I care what happens to you. Or the moral of the story of the wall. The walls we build up for self-preservation will be our undoing on the micro and the macro levels. Together we stand, divided we fall. You have to reach out to connect to survive. We're all stumbling around this big rock, flying through space together. No one knows the wheres or whys. You have to lead with empathy. Empathy is the food the indomitable spirit of man needs to survive. All is not lost, the unconquerable will, and such. That empathy point seems ironic today, but keep in mind John Lennon was writing about peace and love when that was the one thing he struggled with the most in his life. Being the Roger Waters apologist in the room, a pretty tough position to fill these days. I really am a glutton for punishment. I've wondered if my interpretation of his writing as a whole is rooted in me finding him nice to look at. But no. It came from a very real place. From August 1970 in Disc and Music Echo, he said, "I wonder if there's anything to say which I'm not capable of articulating. There's words, obviously, but unless you know someone very well, so you're not at all frightened of them, it's very hard to communicate with words. But we don't say what we mean half the time. We either say what sounds right, or what the other person wants to hear, or any number of things. Think back to If. It was so unusual among Roger's Floyd material to show that kind of vulnerability. If I were a good man, I'd talk with you more often than I do. He openly longs for connection, recognizing rather the detachment. Echoes feels more in keeping because the lyrics craft with the detachment. The narrator is looking down at strangers from his open window. I think my general presentation does a lot to soften how intense of a person I actually am. Roger never had that issue. But when you separate my words from my presentation, I think things will come into focus. And the last verse of Echoes is a nod to the Beatles. You can't go wrong with that.
Inciting and inviting me.
Inviting and inciting me to rise.
Quote, ambitious beyond anything Pink Floyd had attempted before, wild beyond anything they'd attempt after. Like the spooky, forever rising Greek chorus at the end of the song, this was the moment they ascended. Michael Watts said, all sound and fury signifying nothing. I say bullshit. Echoes was the moment Pink Floyd became Pink Floyd. Dave agreed. We were looking for something. During that whole period through Ummagumma and Atom Heart Mother, we were finding ourselves. Echoes was the point at which we found our focus. What a way to close an album. By the way, Dark Side of the Rainbow, not real, but Echoes syncing up with the closing of 2001 is too perfect to ignore, especially when you consider that one of Roger's great career regrets is Floyd not scoring 2001. It's tricky to evaluate Meddle as a whole. As a viewer in the comments of my Highway 61 episode, that viewer quoted Todd in the Shadows. A good song can make an album, but a great song can kill it. Meddle is stuck in limbo. It's got Echoes, the best Pink Floyd song. But is this the best Pink Floyd album for bearing Echoes? Not a chance. Any and all worthy material on side one, One of These Days, Pillow of Winds, Fearless, cannot hold a candle to the greatness of side two. And side one is dragged down by one poor track, Saint-Tropez. I do not want to see you ragging on Seamus in this comment section. Seamus is a good boy! As Nick pointed out in his book, Meddle was the first time Floyd had worked together on an album in the studio since A Saucer Full of Secrets. That feels like ancient fucking history by now. People do a lot of growing up in 4 years. Everyone's settled down, bought houses, they found their direction in life. And despite bearing the space rock label, Pink Floyd didn't yet have a sound to call their own. They molted from psych to prog to orchestra rock with no breathing room in between, save for a couple crucial elements to come: Meddle, They found it. And Dave found his direction in the band. He no longer feels like the hired gun. He's a key player and an asset. Over this album and the next, the guy really comes into his own. One has to acknowledge Meddle is key in Floyd's development as a group. They're positioning themselves as musical pioneers, but not quite as pretentiously as Adam Hart Mother can be. Oh god, now the beefest Christ followers are gonna come after me. Or as unmoored and chaotic as Ummagumma is. Meddle was Pink Floyd's aha moment. We'll take it from here. My personal favorites on this one are One of These Days, A Pillow of Winds, and, of course, Echoes. Despite the guys being more satisfied with this album overall, everything in the middle of Meddle was never played live, just One of These Days and Echoes. Within a month of Meddle's release, Roger has another idea. They've found the muse, they've found their direction. By all accounts, Pink Floyd are ready to move on to their next studio album. There's just one problem. So let me get this straight. You're not covering More, a film soundtrack. Yup. But you're covering Obscured by Clouds, which is a film soundtrack? Yup. Have you lost the plot? Oh, you're one to talk. You put a guy in a gorilla suit on stage. For as much as Storm Thorgerson ragged on the Meddle art, Hipgnosis really threw in the towel on Obscured by Clouds. Storm and Aubrey received a batch of stills from director Barbette Schroeder, but nothing really grabbed them. The one reaching through trees to pick fruit got jammed in the guy's slide projector, it got blurry, boom, Obscured by Clouds. In his book Mind Over Matter, Storm explained how the guys played off the cover. Quote, "Suddenly, in front of our very eyes, the out-of-focus quality imbued an ordinary image with more transcendental qualities." Or so we told Barbette. Schroeder didn't buy it. He said Hipgnosis threw the cover on purpose because they knew Floyd had another record in the pipeline. The guys, quote, "were delighted to be doing the music for the film, but they didn't want it to do too well relative to their serious work. I sent them a movie still for the cover of the LP. They really wanted to sabotage the thing, and so they blurred the photograph beyond all recognition. It was not in any sense an eye-catching cover. They didn't want to have another experience like More, which outperformed Ummagumma in most territories. On Obscured by Clouds, we have Roger Waters on bass and lead vocals on Free 4, David Gilmour on guitar, lead vocals, playing some bass and VCS 3, Richard Wright on organ, piano, keyboard, VCS 3, lead vocals on Stay and co-lead on Burning Bridges, and Nick Mason on drums and percussion. Obscured by Clouds was produced by Pink Floyd. After Meddle, the guys, especially Roger, were eager to go in the direction of Echoes. At a band meeting at Nick and Lindy's house in late 1971, Roger first pitched A Piece for Assorted Lunatics, later retitled Eclipse, later retitled Merry Christmas, Kiddies. This is the closest thing you'll be getting to a Dark Side of the Moon redux for a very, very long time. Dave said, quote, "I remember Roger saying he wanted to write it absolutely straight, clear and direct, to say exactly what he wanted for the first time and get away from psychedelic patter and mysterious warblings." Roger's idea of absolutely straight was working out his changing worldview in song. Like I said in the last chapter, playtime is over for these guys. Roger just turned 30 and he was having a bit of an existential crisis. We've seen it in songs like Grantchester Meadows and If, and we'll see it again with songs in this chapter. The three themes he's mulling over right now are fear, madness, and death. From the jump, Assorted Lunatics was different. This was the most focused his writing had ever been. Basically, Roger locked the fuck in. Quote, "It had to be quick, because we had a tour starting. It might have been only 6 weeks before we had to have something to perform." This would be the first time Pink Floyd ever took a full album out on the road. Remember, most of the past 3 we've talked about were never played live. They didn't even play most of the Piper stuff in the old days. After sitting down together and making a list of all the things dogging them, aging, death, travel anxiety. The guys booked time at the studio and noodled around with some very, very early concepts. Rick's violent sequence from the Zabriskie days was resurrected, and he presented a new mortality sequence. This would be a much more serious Man and the Journey. No gorilla suits here. The guys test ran Assorted Lunatics in its most embryonic stage at a series of gigs in February of 1972, but it was frequently marred by technical difficulties. Its debut at the Brighton Dome completely fell apart when the playback machine malfunctioned during Money. You can't really play Money without the pocket change tape loop. Things went much better February 18th at the Rainbow. But as so often goes with Floyd, they had some loose ends to tie up first. From Nick, quote, "After the doldrums we had encountered around the time of Adam Hart Mother, we had a revitalized sense of purpose. Obscured by Clouds was the first of the interruptions." Floyd was on the hook for one more soundtrack. For Barbette Schroeder, director of More. Schroeder's latest bizarro hippie film, La Vallée, quote, demystifies the ideals of a hippie generation more concerned with personal growth than with inventing alternative social methods. We saw this a lot with the kids out on the hippie trail. Dr. Cleo Audzer's memoir, Go Off Freaks, is kind of a window into this attitude. Barbette tackles that idea through wealthy travelers and hippie expats adventuring in New Guinea. Like the More soundtrack, Floyd's work, quote, was clearly the music the characters in the movie were listening to. Doing this soundtrack wasn't a bad distraction from the fact that an Assorted Lunatics bootleg from the Rainbow was already on the market. Also circulating in 1972, the Ummagumma bootleg. It consists of outtakes from Zabriskie Point sessions, plus a live recording of Embryo. This motherfucker is at the top of my Discogs wish list. If I owned a copy of Ummagumma, holy shit, record collection complete. Time and time again in Pink Floyd history, Obscured by Clouds is treated as an afterthought. Glenn Povey's book treats it as if it didn't exist. Nick's book gives it a whopping 2.5 pages. I had to scour for information on this thing. What makes Obscured by Clouds not an afterthought? One acquisition that would change all of rock and roll history. In 1972, Rick Wright bought a VCS-3 synthesizer, one of the earliest sequencers on the market. This blew Obscured by Clouds and the Assorted Lunatics project on the back burner wide f***ing open. Cue Pink Floyd Mach 3. According to Nick and Glenn Povey, the whole of Obscured by Clouds was hammered out in all of a few days, from February 23rd to 29th of 1972 at Chateau Hervé, aka Elton John's Honky Chateau. Jean-Michel Guedin and Philippe Margatin allege that Obscured by Clouds was recorded in 2 pieces, the dates in February plus March 23rd through 27th. Schroeder, Floyd, and their wives and girlfriends worked, lived, and ate at the chateau for those few weeks. Of Floyd's entourage, Dave was the only one who could speak fluent French, so Ginger remembers him writing down simple French phrases for her so she could get around and do the shopping. The guys came with only vague ideas of the music. Schroeder remembers them often leaving the tapes running as they jammed stuff out. They worked like an assembly line. You work on this music, I work on that music, he works on the lyrics, boom, 10 songs in 14 days. And unlike More, the guys actually had the film to work with this time. Burning Bridges came first, then Stay, then the rest to follow. Quote, with minimal preparation, they literally made the record on the spot, in the studio, to the amazement of the technicians. Quite amazing when you consider their EMI work ethic. One hapless, nameless EMI engineer noted, quote, they could take forever to do anything. This manic stroke of productivity is made all the more remarkable when you remember Obscured by Clouds production was interrupted by a whole-ass tour of Japan. It produced this tour bus photo, in which Ginger looks into the camera like it's The Office. From the sound of it, this moment of Ginger breaking the fourth wall was pretty much the vibe of the whole tour. Floyd later confessed they didn't know who half the people on their bus were. The soundtrack was mixed back at at Morgan Studios in April, the track listing of Obscured by Clouds goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the title track, Obscured by Clouds, followed by When You're In, then Burning Bridges, next, The Gold It's in the, followed by What's the Deal, and side 1 closes with Mudmen. Opening up side 2, we have Childhood's End, followed by Free 4, then Stay, and the album closes with Absolutely Curtains. Obscured by Clouds was released as an album in June of 1972. After a rumored altercation with the film company, Floyd retitled the project Obscured by Clouds to distance themselves from La Vallée. According to this telling of the story, which Saucerful of Secrets, Comfortably Numb, and Pink Floyd All the Songs all repeat, in retaliation, La Vallée was retitled Obscured by Clouds. Across every major source I have cited today, Echoes, Pink Floyd All the Songs, Embryo, Comfortably Numb, Saucerful of Secrets, and Nick's memoir, I couldn't find so much as a hint of what supposedly happened between Pink Floyd and this production company. There is no concrete evidence. Not even Barbet Schroeder himself has elaborated. If you ask me, the film retitling was simply a bid to capitalize on Floyd's newfound commercial success post-Meddle and Obscured by Cloud's success in the French market. It hit number 1 there. And it sounds like La Vallée needed a boost. It earned an essay in Tim Healy's 1986 book, The World's Worst Movies. Nevertheless, Schroeder liked the soundtrack. He liked the title track in particular, probably why he renamed his movie after it. Quote, "It was fantastic to have this music soaring above the zones the plane was flying over, zones that were otherwise just white spots on the map. White spots being areas Westerners hadn't yet made contact with." He also said, "I do think it surprised the Pink Floyd that they could make such a good album in just 2 weeks. Perhaps they shouldn't have taken so long in the studio on all those other records." Somehow, Free 4 was Pink Floyd's first hit in the US. It broke the top 50 on the singles chart. During all of this, a project from back in the Adam Hart Mother days began to take form. In the fall of 1970, choreographer Roland Pettit approached Floyd to compose music for his new ballet based on Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. Pettit's daughter tipped him off to Floyd. She was a big fan, and Floyd took interest because Nick's wife Lindy was a ballet dancer. The Remembrance of Things Past concept didn't last long at all. Roger bought all 12 volumes of Remembrance for the guys to read. He finished 1 volume and gave up. Dave bailed after a whopping 18 pages. But the ballet idea moved forward. It would be a 4-way collab between Floyd, Pettit, his principal dancer Rudolf Nureyev, and Roman Polanski, who hoped to make a film adaptation of the whole thing. They all had lunch together on December 4th, 1970 to discuss the whole thing. It quickly devolved into drunken ego madness. Roger remembers, quote, "Everyone just sat there drinking this wine and getting more and more drunk, with more and more poovery." Poovery. God, this man is terminally British. Going on around the table until someone suggested Frankenstein, and then Nureyev started getting a bit worried. I, for one, am bummed. A Frankenstein ballet featuring the music of Pink Floyd never happened. Could you imagine? Careful with that axe, Eugene, to the resurrection scene. It's alive. It's alive! It's alive! Here's this photo of Nosferatu Roger I found on Pinterest. Anyway, nothing came of this project, which was probably for the best. 1001 Arabian Nights and Carmen were also shopped around, and a full-page ad appeared in Cashbox for the Remembrance concept, but none played out. The ballet idea was finally able to move forward in 1972, but they had a pretty tight window of time to make it happen. It was first staged in Marseille in November of 1972, smack in the middle of Floyd touring Europe. They had all of 2 days to rehearse. The original agreement was for Floyd to compose all new music for Pettit to choreograph to, but between Obscured by Clouds, the touring schedule, and the impending Dark Side, Both parties agreed Floyd were way too busy as is. Pettit choreographed the third act of this 3-act ballet to One of These Days, Careful with That Axe, Obscured by Clouds, When You're In, and Echoes. Being married to a dancer, Nick had a pretty sunny idea towards the ballet. Quote, "The thing to do is to really move people, to turn them on, to subject them to a fantastic experience, to do something to stretch their imagination." Dave wasn't impressed. The reality of all these people prancing around in tights in front of us didn't feel like what we wanted to do long term. Of course, since this is Floyd, we have to have some great big show of rock stardom to speak for. For their grand finale, they blew up 10 cans of oil at the front of the stage. Pettit continued staging his ballet into '73 without Floyd as a live attraction. Presumably without 10 cans of lighter fluid either. In September of '72, an early version of Pompeii was screened at the Edinburgh Arts Festival. The aforementioned runtime complications, they only got like 3 days of usable footage out of their trip to Pompeii, had delayed its release. In this interview, Adrian asks about the group's previous reliance upon their gear. Rick replied, quote, "It's a danger that we could become slaves to all our equipment, and in the past we have been.
But what we're trying to do is to sort it all out, so that we're not. It worries me sometimes that we have this much equipment, and you can hide behind it."
Dave said,
That's a load of rubbish.
Well, could you explain why it's a load of rubbish?
We're all totally free human beings and we can do whatever we want to do.
I mean, it's all extensions of what's coming out of our heads. You've got to have it inside your head to get it out at all anyway, and the equipment isn't actually thinking of what to do any of the time. It couldn't control itself. Give a man a Les Paul guitar and he doesn't become Eric Clapton. At last, Pink Floyd are no longer slaves to their equipment. But Pompeii is still the thorn in Pink Floyd's ass. The official public premiere at the Rainbow on November 25th, 1972 was cancelled. The venue just decided not to let Adrian Maben and company know about a stipulation in the contract until a whopping 24 hours before the premiere. There simply wasn't the time to work it out. The film didn't get a theatrical release until the summer of 1974. Over a year after the release of their landmark album, Dark Side of the Moon. Of the 4 albums on the docket, I was the least familiar with Obscured by Clouds. The question I sought to answer with this chapter was, given respect to more, of course, is Obscured by Clouds the last truly underrated Pink Floyd album? I also intentionally saved reviewing this album for last because I knew by the time I was wrapping up with this project I would be sick of the typical Pink Floyd sound at this stage. There's only so much celestial noodling one woman can take. Obscured by Clouds is different. It sounds American, indicative of 1972 through '73 being the first years Floyd were primarily focused on touring the States. They toured America before, most of which with disastrous consequences, but they always toured Europe and other territories more. You want your American connection, Mark Blake? Here it is! A side note, I will be reviewing this as a studio album because it is a Pink Floyd canon studio album. I'm saving reviewing its role as a soundtrack for this hypothetical more Zabriskie La Vallée Pompeii project. We drop the needle on one buzzing synth fading in. After a few bars, an early drum machine plays 2 measures of 4. On the third, the synth chord is filled out. The drum machine adds a couple of toms and Nick drums over it. Now think of how long it took One of These Days to build tension and release. Like 3 whole minutes passed until... Obscured by Clouds completes its tension release cycle in all of 29 seconds. It's indicative of the rest of Obscured by Clouds. No wiggle room, no time to waste. More synths layer in, the drum machine changes the placement of the rests, and Dave's guitar is outlined by, you guessed it, more synths. These are primitive digital sounds. In spite of all the layers, it somehow feels minimalistic. It gets you excited for what's to come. The title track is followed by another short instrumental, When You're In, named after the catchphrase of roadie Chris Adamson. Whenever someone asked him how a task was going, he'd get them off his back by saying, "I'm in. And when you're in, you're in." One thing I noticed off the bat about Obscured by Clouds is that so far Rick feels absent. I think that's because he mostly mans synthesizers instead of his home instrument, the keyboard. He enters on keys, playing along with Dave's stamping riff. He plays some great organ fills as well. This feels like a natural continuation of the title track without synths, a cool, sturdy anticipation. This momentum is dropped by Burning Bridges. It's quite pretty, but I question its place here on the track listing. As a soundtrack, of course, you should have your song track in order of how things appear in the movie, but this is also a Pink Floyd studio album? I don't know, it's just a pacing thing for me, the listener of the album, as opposed to the viewer of the film. Burning Bridges indulges in Floyd's dreamier side, a gorgeous instrumental with a pretty co-lead vocal by Dave and Rick. Their two voices just work together. They had the same soft quality, but diverged just enough in their accents and timbre for a point of oral interest. It's very pleasing to the ear. The lyrics tell the story of someone looking ahead, seeking to shed invisible bonds that hold them. Society, man. Come on, it's a Pink Floyd video. We can't not have at least one society man joke. Stolen moments floating softly on the air, borne on wings of fire and climbing higher. Who knows what that means? Dave's lyrics in these days could be quite abstract. Rick grounds it. Ancient bonds are breaking, moving on in changing skies, dreaming of a new day, cast aside the other way. The new generation seeking to dismantle the conventions of their elders. It's a very 60s way of thinking, but by 1972, that frame of thought would be ancient history. From what I know of the plot of the film La Vallée, though, it's in keeping. A rich lady ditches her superficial life to indulge in free love, man, and live off the grid. Very 60s. You can tell Floyd were watching the film as they wrote this time. The lyrics quite plainly reference this. Beyond the gilded cage, beyond the reach of ties, the moment is at hand. She breaks the golden band. Of Obscured by Clouds, I most expected the Gold It's in the to be the breakout hit in the States. It's got a ridiculously hooky riff, and Floyd is cosplaying as a standard pop band? It's jarring considering who this is coming from, especially a turnaround followed by a reverbless guitar solo? Oh my god. And a key change? Holy shit, bro. Who are you people? But the band is tight, and this is a pumped up tune. The lyrics of setting off on an adventure, looking for gold and uncharted land, it sounds like the modern man's equivalent of the expedition. The rock and roll tour. You could just as easily set this to a tour bus montage as you could a hippie caravan in the jungle. The fun is in the journey. This is followed by What's the Deal, which is so close to being a Stairway song. Someone's gotta have Vinyl Monday bingo at this point. It's a soft Dave guitar ballad with a wonderful harmony. Even the stop time when he sings What's the Deal is so sticky. The lyrics are about a loss of innocence. Let me in from the cold, turn my lead into gold, 'cause there's a chill wind blowing in my soul and I think I'm growing old. He's revisiting one of the themes of A Pillow of Winds. Themes of growing up and feeling like you got a late start in life, you're playing catch up, those are very relevant to what will become Darkside. Got to make it to the next meal, try to keep up with the turning wheel. Mile after mile, stone after stone. Stone, 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 stone. film. I feel like the Taylor Swift truthers. They find Easter eggs in everything. They look at the color nail polish on her right hand ring finger and go, oh, this must surely mean she's a lesbian. I'm finding Easter eggs everywhere, even when there probably are no Easter eggs to be found. Floyd are trimming down their instrumental passages on Obscured by Clouds. Rick edges in some nice fills on piano, decorating the feel of the song, but this format is not doing Nick a service. Unfortunately, Obscured by Clouds is the beginning of Floyd material that just didn't highlight his skill set. The days of Saucerful of Secrets and drum kit gymnastics are over. Side 1 is closed out with a Burning Bridges reprise called Mud Men. Maybe it's because this is such a compact package from the guys, but I feel it's a little soon for a reprise. It's more for atmosphere than anything. In any way, Rick plays a wonderful gliding organ, and I think that's Nick on Celeste or vibraphone. It mingles with the organ in a very 70s way, as do the round synth sounds with the guitar. It ramps up into a full-on organ showcase. This really feels like the germination of Great Gig. Obscured by Clouds really kicks off with Childhood's End, named after the sci-fi book written by Arthur C. Clarke. Roger mentioned Clarke in interview all the way back in the Ummagumma days. He said he wanted Floyd to compose for his next screenplay. Childhood's End is all but a proto-time. The synths, the drum machine, the manner of which the instruments are introduced, Dave's vocal melody.
Shout in your sleep, perhaps the prize is just catch up with the sun, but it's sinking.
It's so fully formed from the beginning, though Dave's solo here pales in comparison to Time. Time was the greatest solo Dave ever played. It might be the greatest guitar solo in all of rock and roll. It's perfectly structured, perfect phrasing, perfectly executed. It's astonishing hearing where that came from. It takes a keen ear to pick up on the seeds of Dark Side in Side 1 of Obscured by Clouds. Side 2 hits you right over the head. In terms of the rhythm of his lyrics, Dave treats the structure of Childhood's End a little differently than Roger would Time. Having your closing line be, so all things time will mend, and so this song will end, it's clumsy. It's what's in the middle of the song that I'm interested in. Dave digs into realizing just how small you are in an unfathomably wide universe and the unending procession of time. You awake with a start to the beating of your heart. Just one man beneath the sky, just two ears, just two eyes. It doesn't surprise me that Pisces Dave gets watery with the imagery in his lyrics. The guy loved sailing. Our narrator sails through his past. You set sail across the sea, long past thoughts and memories, childhood's end, your fantasies merge with harsh realities. He gets nostalgic. And then, as the sail is hoist, you find your eyes growing moist, and all the fears you never voiced say you have to make the final choice. It's your choice to use your past as your compass or your future. Who are you and who am I to say we know the reason why? Some are born, some men die, beneath the infinite sky. Dave agrees. No one knows the wheres or whys. Where the gold it's in the should have been Floyd's breakout hit here, it somehow was free for. Don't let its bouncy, hokey handclap feel fool you though. With Childhood's End, Free 4 might just be a Rosetta Stone of the Pink Floyd classic period. Schaffner said, quote, "Rarely, in fact, had the form of the 3-minute-plus pop song ever encompassed a worldview of such breathtaking cynicism. Rog drops all-timers like the memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime, and life is a warm, short moment, death is a long, cold rest. You get your chance to try in the blink of an eye, 80 years with luck, or even less. Within measures of each other. Life is short. Make the most of it." Rog also smacks the music industry, a machine he will slam into on Wish You Were Here. So all aboard for the American tour, and maybe you'll make it to the top. And mind how you go, and I can tell you, 'cause I know, you may find it hard to get off. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Roger wrote Clegg about a World War II vet all the way back in 1968, but Free 4 is the first time he directly references his father's death in song. You are the angel of death, and I am the dead man's son. He was buried like a mole in a foxhole, and everyone's still on the run. While Dave and Raj look forward, Rick looks back. Stay is him revisiting the central theme of Summer 68, seeking genuine connection where there is none. It's the flip side of Roger's core songwriting philosophy, right? Reaching out to and leading with empathy for your fellow man will save us, but what happens when you reach out and there's just nothing? It's bittersweet. Their two paths will never cross again. She exists only in this moment. Midnight blue, burning gold, a yellow moon is growing cold. He's pleasantly surprised to still find her there in the morning, but he can't even remember her name to bid her goodbye. Midnight blue turns to gray. This night will fade away in his memory, as has her name. There's yet another echo of the Burning Bridges motif, but I like the way the guys prepare it here. This hazy feel, watery guitar, lovely piano, and I believe more Celeste. The closing track of Obscured by Clouds and closing scene of La Vallée that it corresponds with is one hell of a closing track to Pink Floyd's experimental period. Even the title works. Absolutely curtains. There's a sliver of Shine On You Crazy Diamond in the introduction, though these feel more organic and futuristic than cold and harsh. The synths peek through thick vegetation. Beautiful cymbal washes by Nick bubble up from underneath. Rick plays what sounds like a twinkling harpsichord. The buzzing, droning synths make me feel lightheaded. Then the rumbling drums and the high-flying organ. We've found Shangri-La, the lost wonder of the world tucked away in the fabled valley. The chanting of the Mapuga tribe closes out the album. Some, if not all of it, is reversed. New Guinea was certainly alive in the public consciousness back then. Michael Rockefeller went missing and was presumably cannibalized there in 1961. My God, the Rockefellers. This thing goes way deeper than I thought. What's next? The pyramids? All of a sudden, you're no longer the last of a lost civilization. One of just 2 tracks on this album, clocking it at over 5 minutes, and it necessitates each second of its runtime. It's hard not to have your breath taken away as the subtle beauty of the soundscape unfolds before you. Nick doesn't think of Obscured by Clouds as much of a Pink Floyd album, rather a collection of songs that everyone liked. Dave shrugs off the project's stopgap label. He says this is one of his favorite things he did with the band. He even incorporated What's the Deal into his solo sets in the 2000s. I can't believe this thing was whipped up in 2 weeks. Despite their TV watching, foosball playing habits in the studio, Floyd in fact were capable of discipline. This shows a completely different side to the band, an alternate universe where they were just another rock and roll band. There are very few atmospheric romps and little to no spacewalks, only 2 songs longer than 5 minutes, just a lean, mean rock and roll outfit. They employ a lean and powerful, but not exactly unforgettable style. It's weird. I have all these songs liked on Spotify. It's clearly a good body of work, but if you asked me to sing anything back to you, I don't think I could come up with much. But if you played me a cut from this album, I'd be able to tell you in the first 2 seconds that it came from Obscured by Clouds. Floyd never sounded like this before or since. It's an earthy, organic, thick green interpretation of Floyd's pastel wash. Glenn Povey called it, quote, as striking as it is subtle. You can absolutely tell Darkside was on their minds. Obscured by Clouds was undoubtedly a medium for the guys to test out some of their new musical ideas and equipment. It was a new source of inspiration and a test drive before embarking on what they considered the real thing. While it might feel like a regression to some listeners, I get the feeling this album is a band tying up loose ends before their next big, very big mission. If Pompeii is the father of Darkside, Obscured by Clouds is the mother. My personal favorites on this one are the title track, Childhood's End, Free 4, Stay, and Absolutely Curtains. Floyd didn't wait until the body was cold to move on. Most of this album was never played live, save for the title track and Childhood's End. Both numbers were fully retired by the time Dark Side came out, and any hits to follow blew Free Forest chart performance out of the friggin' water. Obscured by Clouds was buried like a mole in a foxhole, and everyone's still on the run. Who up concluding they special right now? About recording echoes, our premier Pink Floyd oral historian said, quote, "This experimentation could be seen as either a brave radicalism or an enormous waste of studio time. Either way, it allowed us to teach ourselves equipment techniques which might at first be clearly nonsensical, but eventually led to something usable. Usable at worst, brilliant at best. That's Pink Floyd's experimental period for ya." A Melody Maker piece from September of 1970, at Floyd's peak Adam Hart Mother weirdness, hailed them as, quote, "a sustained attempt to harness in sound our crazed, demented, agonized ambitions." Hearing this development across 4 albums and 5 years makes Dark Side all the more a triumph. You hear bits and pieces of what they'd been grasping at for the past half a decade. The Body, Dark Side. Zabriskie Point, Dark Side. Obscured by Clouds, Dark Side. The heavy breathing, clocks, and bells in The Man in the Journey, Dark Side. The crash sound on Adam Hart Mother, Dark Side. Household Objects, Wish You Were Here, using animal sound effects on a track. Animals, duh. Roger's theater kid antics / inflatables, animals, The Wall. You! Yes, you! Stand still, laddie! Roger's dad dying in the war, literally all of The Wall. The Concept, capital T and C. Dark Side, maybe. Wish You Were Here, kind of. Animals, mostly. The Wall, absolutely. You don't just go from this to this. You can't. Try it for yourself. You'll produce a load of fluffy crap. This was the most important period in Pink Floyd history. Author Will Romano said, "After Syd Barrett faded away, Floyd began searching for a new course. The Floyd were no longer chasing dreams of psychedelia in an attempt to hang on to Syd's music and memory. These are not the strongest of Floyd efforts, but they show a band attempting to define itself." Ummagumma is absolutely a Growing Pains album. Adam Hart Mother is just as fractured, but oddly endearing in how unabashedly weird it is. Meddle was their first light bulb moment. They found their rhythm, found each other again, cut the fat off the tenderloin. I'm sorry, I had to squeeze in one more cow pun. And though Obscured by Clouds is remembered as a distraction, and it honestly kind of was, did the last thing they needed to finally come into their own after 4 years of floundering. It pushed them out of their comfort zone. Finally, they've caught it. You just want to leap out of your seat and cheer, run up to them and give them a handshake, or a high five, or a hug, or a big sloppy kiss on the mouth, you beautiful beast of a man, you. But this reverie came at a cost. After this period, the adventuring stopped. Floyd was no longer a collaborative effort. The unprecedented success of Dark Side of the Moon, no one could have predicted it would have charted for 14 years straight. It went to its principal lyricist's head. Through the rest of the 1970s, Pink Floyd became the Roger Waters Show. If I had a nickel for every time Roger Waters wrote a concept album about his dad dying in the war, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but dude, go to fucking therapy! Okay, but the one about his divorce was actually pretty good, and fucking shit, it's got Eric Clapton on it! So, who is Pink Floyd? You could make a serious argument for David Gilmour, with his perpetually red eyes, tan skin, and long stringy hair, bare feet caked in black soot. He's the closest thing Floyd had to a face of the band. It's hard for the music not to have a pastel wash, with a voice like his and a playing style like his. Light as a feather, dancing on air. It took the shape of whatever container it was in, like water. The guy is a Pisces, after all. Handsome Squidward, his perpetual stonedness, unwashed Adonis. His presence moved Floyd in this direction. But if we're talking most valuable player, come on, it was always Rick Wright. He was the classically trained musician of the four. Without his knowledge, this crazy shit would have fallen apart. He put up with more of his fair share to make it happen. I have always asserted that Rick was essential to Pink Floyd's sound. Without him, Pink Floyd would have been just another rock and roll band. He launched them into space. Rick was their not-so-secret ingredient. Well, what about Nick Mason? This was the period of Floyd in which he excelled. If you ask me, after this, he was coasting. Or maybe the material didn't serve him as well as it could have. He keeps the old, weird stuff alive with his Saucerful of Secrets band. He is the star of Live at Pompeii, the most enduring project of the experimental period. The very picture of the transition from metal to dark side. Ridiculous facial hair, crustless pie and all. If Pink Floyd ever get their Almost Famous meets Spinal Tap, Rock You Mock You biopic, I know who I want narrating it. Roger Waters. God, he's frustrating. He may engage in needlessly petty bullshit with his ex-bandmates and their wives. He may put his foot directly into his mouth. He may have taken one of mankind's greatest achievements and turned it into a self-indulgent redux album. He's an egotistical mega-jerk. But no Roger, no Floyd. Ummagumma live disc engineer Brian Humphreys boldly asserted, quote, "I think of Roger actually being Pink Floyd. After all, he does write all the songs. I've been listening to Pink Floyd for half my life now. His lyrics made as much sense to me at 13 as they do at 26, and they will keep aging with me. I don't know if the music would have that longevity otherwise. No personality in rock and roll is quite as challenging as his, and I do love a good challenge." His name was Roger too. People closest to him only called him Roger. We, from the distant future, know him as Syd Barrett. He dared to dream, to imagine, to create. None of what we talked about today, none of it, would have happened without him once being here. I was left with so many questions after the mid-season special that I sought answers in what his band did after his departure. They were crawling around for the answers too. It's not lost on me that Pink Floyd only got it once they referenced Syd again. The lunatic is on the grass. They made a beautiful, haunted muse out of a mortal man, one who existed between two worlds and paid a steep price for it. I think that'll haunt me forever. It's cliche to call anything a love letter too, but this really is a love letter to the post-Halcyon, pre-Learjet days where Pink Floyd weren't afraid to be weird. Stoned in public, high on big ideas, shooting for somewhere between Oberon and Miranda, but drifting somewhere even better. It wasn't immediate. Instant gratification spoils souls. The creative failures gave them the space to be unapologetically themselves. That's part of why the world is so fucked up today. We're afraid to be embarrassing, to be weird in public, to try and fail. How do we get to the dark side of the moon if we don't shoot at all? Remember a few chapters ago when I mentioned Ginger signed her book for me? I'd like to read you what she wrote to me. May the beauty you are always be the beauty you do. This whole project made it to me at exactly the right time. Since I covered animals last July, I think it was, Floyd have been my refuge from the anxious, upsetting, busy, dark, strange, and new. They're gentle when I need them to be, and tough when I can't be tough for myself. Modern life is fucked. We're more divided than ever, corruption is everywhere, out in the open, and there don't seem to be any consequences for it. The procession of time is inescapable. Society, man. But don't you want someone to tell you that with a 7-minute guitar solo? Don't you want to have a good laugh as someone pours a pint of beer down a tuba or inhales screams in public? Don't you want to think of a nice time in your life as some bloke mumbles about marmalade and bumps into the corner of his breakfast table? While this was not the best period in Pink Floyd's history, it's their most creative, their most collaborative, their most daring, the most important. It might seem strange to quote someone so gothic to close this thing out. Why not something from Dune, or something by Orwell or Vonnegut? Because when I first discovered Pink Floyd half my life ago, when I'd wait for my mom to pick me up from art club after school, I'd sit and wait in the cemetery out back. I wasn't a well-adjusted kid, but I knew good music. The following excerpt is much better suited to that memory. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns uptight, I have reached these lands but newly from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild weird clime that leath sublime, out of space, out of time. And that's it. That's Vinyl Monday Season 4. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday mornings at 11, but you won't be seeing me here for a little bit because holy fucking shit, I need a break. In the meantime, you can catch up on the Dolls podcast, which I co-host with my friend Emma. We're on a season break from that as well. Emma's on maternity leave, but that's available wherever you stream your podcasts. You can read my upcoming Buckingham Nicks review on trackingangle.com, and if this video somehow wasn't enough Pink Floyd for you, my 50th anniversary Wish You Were Here retrospect is on my website now. You can subscribe to the mailing list of said website, abigaildevoe.com, to get an email as soon as the rest of the written reviews from this video are posted. Again, Ummagumma is up now for your reading pleasure. I can't believe I'm going into my 5th year of doing this. This started as like a silly post-grad time killer, and now it's part of my fucking job, but it wouldn't be part of my fucking job without all like 61,000 of you or something crazy like that. You guys could fill a stadium. Thank you for making my life path possible. It's an honor and a pleasure. Now, let's have the Kazoo Brigade play us out. Kazoo Brigade!
1, 2, 3, 4!